After a long journey, the carriage arrived at the fortress. The man inside asked for the gates to be opened, as he was bringing her. The protagonist looked out the window, and instantly, her bright pink eyes filled with amazement and surprise upon seeing the enormous fortress. Immediately, they opened the gates of the Phoenix Duchy fortress for them. The young woman had been told that it was always winter in the north, but inside the estate, defying the severe cold, it was astonishingly green, and Yuna was even surprised by the capabilities of the magic stones. The uncle informed the protagonist that this was now her new home. Starting today, she was the Archduke's wife. As soon as Yuna stepped out of the carriage, the maids who received her began to whisper among themselves. Without even disguising it, the uncle's hand rested on his niece's shoulder. He explained that people in the north are usually cold towards strangers. On Rue Island, where the protagonist came from, the nation did not exist, but she would give everything for her tribe. She took off her hood and introduced herself with a smile. The maids were stunned by her angelic beauty. Suddenly, a male voice very close by asked if that was his wife, and everyone jumped when they saw his lordship. Lord Theo of Phoenix, stained with blood, explained that he was coming from a hunt. He extended his bloodied hand toward the young woman. As soon as the man introduced himself, the protagonist timidly shook his hand, which was surprisingly very warm and large. Although the man's speech was quite cold, but June didn't care about that at all. The lord dropped the bomb. No official wedding ceremony. The protagonist was stunned. Theo confessed, 3 weddings under his belt, and the wives either ran away or kicked the bucket. Shortly after, the lord's secretary showed her where she would reside, in separate quarters from Theo, according to Yuli's, to gradually acclimatize to the place. But bam! The girl's room, in the tower attic and the rest of the floors, completely deserted. The protagonist, between shock and ecstasy, couldn't believe she would live alone in such a place. Lord Phoenix, giving it to the vial in his office. Yuli's arrived and gave his report. The girl settled in the North Tower, but doubt gnawed at her. Why was her lord stained with blood? If there was no hunt, Theo explained that this was a kind of warning. He made it clear that there would be no marital harmony. Now she will stay quiet as a mouse, without leaving her dusty attic. Hearing this, Yuli's decided to call David. With a smile, the lord asked if she had cried upon learning about the attic, but the advisors reported that she was smiling. Theo's eyes snapped open and he stopped drinking, as he did not expect those words from Yuli's. The protagonist was delighted. She was happy to have such a large personal space. Moreover, thanks to the magic stones, the room was quite warm and even heated her icy hands for a few minutes. She hoped that now her tribe members could also live in warmth. The beautiful lady recalled her days of old. The father exclaimed indignantly that she could not marry a man she had never even seen in her life. However, the cold was intensifying on the island, and its people had never known winter. Therefore, the young woman had already decided everything. Before, eternal spring reigned in Rue, but when the island was suddenly hit by a wave of severe frost, its inhabitants panicked. Until now, the magic stones had not been necessary. The emperor's proposal: marry the Archduke and receive a bunch of magic stones in return. It became the last hope for the inhabitants of Rue. But the father stood firm, as Yuna was his only heir. However, the heroine considered protecting her people to be the main task of an heir. Time and again, the protagonist reminded herself that she would succeed. She did not forget that she could count on her uncle Delcan, and Lord Ellis's secretary seemed like a good person. Suddenly, the Archduke's hands came to the protagonist's mind. In Rue, hunters were the most respected caste, almost gods. Moreover, the protagonist had to live in the attic for a year, but Yuna saw it as great for getting to know her husband. She had a premonition that they would get along wonderfully. The beauty was so happy that she accidentally hit the magic stone. They began to fall instantly. The young woman, terrified, tried to catch them so they wouldn't break, but it slipped out of her hands a bit. The girl stumbled against the door, which burst open. The protagonist fell to the floor and realized it was a secret passage she hadn't seen before. The fall hurt a little, truth be told. Suddenly, a voice asked what she was doing there. The protagonist was dumbfounded to see her husband, now clean, looking at her with surprise. Theo was speechless for a few seconds. Yuna tried to explain that she was just trying to catch a stone, but the man didn't understand what was wrong with this girl, because she should currently be in the attic, shedding tears. But instead, she decided to introduce herself again. The heroine said she truly hoped they would get along well. For some reason, the Archduke seemed to see his new wife's face in a new light. and he couldn't even take his eyes off her. He didn't understand why he hadn't looked at her properly during their first encounter, but he instantly caught that floral scent. Theo supposed it might be the perfume of that beautiful girl, and began to examine her closely right then. She was small and delicate. Her eyelashes looked like bird feathers, and her eyes were like two precious gems. And only then did Theo realize he was thinking something strange. He immediately ordered himself mentally to come to his senses. Theo must not feel anything for her, because weakness was unforgivable. Therefore, he could not love that girl. Therefore, he needed to become even colder and harsher. The man decided to shout at her and send her back to the attic. He was about to do it, but when he noticed Yuna shivering from the cold, he instantly forgot all the words in his head. Instead, Theo asked why she was dressed so lightly. He immediately realized his mistake. The emissary of the goddess Daphne was the only soul on the planet worthy of her powerful sacred power. But in reality, she was just an invention. Or rather, that is what everyone believed, until they found a way to steal her power. 2 months ago, Archduke Phoenix asked his loyal advisor if that letter had reached him by pure chance. It spoke of a saint with a red mark who could be sacrificed in a year. To seize the saint's power, one must possess the mark. Theo was the only one in the imperial family who had not yet received the mark. For royalty, marriage was a sacred bond, and the mark was obtained only once, exactly 1 year after the wedding. The mark was for life, so choosing a partner was very serious. But all of the lord's previous fiancées either fled or died. The third candidate for the Archduke's wife was successfully eliminated, and now the preparations to obtain the mark were complete. To be precise, the emperor got rid of all of them. The Archduke was the nephew of Emperor Bao on his mother's side. He was called the demon of war and a beast who went mad on the battlefield, causing absolute terror around him. At age 15, Theo buried his mother and went to the battlefield for the first time. Since then, fear became a luxury he could not afford. If he showed weakness, even for an instant, he would fall, and with him, the north would fall, along with all its inhabitants. In a grave with his enemies, Theo buried his emotions. But this caused his own people to start avoiding him. Every wife of the man fled, risking her life just to avoid living with a monster, or ended up dead. But even so, Theo felt no sadness. He simply let time pass, and the days turn into years. The advisor reported that they urgently needed a plan, because they could not allow the emperor to do whatever he wanted. Therefore, Theo simply decided to marry her. Ulysses indignantly asked how he would marry a woman who would be sacrificed in a year. Theo coldly replied that the emperor would not dare touch her, but he needed to obtain the mark from her. Doubt not at the Archduke. What would the great emperor say if the mark appeared? And now there she was, in front of his brand new wife. Theo mentally prepared himself to give her a good scare. But surprise, the young woman innocently asked if he wasn't cold. The lord coldly replied that the cold did not affect him at all. However, an expression of fascination lit up Juna's face. She averted her gaze, embarrassed by how revealing her attire was, and Theo did not understand her reaction. But he soon understood that his plan had worked perfectly. Theo indicated that crossing the bridge led to her private terrace. He warned her that if she wanted to go anywhere, she must ask his permission, as she could not move without his authorization. Furthermore, Theo decided to intimidate her a little. In a serious tone, he said he was even capable of catching a bright white squirrel. The protagonist was surprised to learn that only a few steps separated the attic from her lordship's quarters. Suddenly, a strong gust of wind blew, and suddenly, Yuna began to lose her balance. The man's hand, almost without thinking, reached out to her. Instantly, the protagonist was very close to her husband, and her face flushed from the proximity. She remained frozen, staring at him. A slight blush also appeared on Theo's face. It seemed the young woman weighed nothing, like a feather, and her figure was of a delicate silhouette. It was as if he were holding a little bird in his hand. Yuna softly called out to his lordship. The Archduke hastily withdrew his hand from the young woman, assuming she simply disliked his touch. The previous wives shuddered at just a brush. But unexpectedly, Yuna thanked him. For the ex-wives, his subjects and enemy soldiers, the Northern Archduke has always been, and will be nothing more than terror incarnate. But there wasn't a shred of fear in Yuna's eyes. Theo suddenly wondered what the point of trying so hard to look terrifying was. Moreover, Theo could give this beautiful young woman everything she desired. So if he offered her something valuable, Yuna couldn't escape. He asked the protagonist if she needed magic stones. Yuna understood that the Archduke knew why she had married him. but he surely wouldn't like it if the protagonist reminded him now that this marriage was purely for convenience. Therefore, Yuna replied that she didn't need him to give them right away. Theo was surprised, but asked what she wanted then. He immediately noticed how the expression on the young woman's face changed and how, after his words, she began to reflect on something. It was unclear what words were about to leave those lips. Maybe now she will ask him to let her go home. However, whatever this girl says, she is sure to face disappointment because Theo was not going to let her go anywhere. Yuna suggested having breakfast together, but he unconsciously refused. As soon as Theo understood the meaning of the words, he asked what she had just said. The protagonist, with a wide and sincere smile, proposed again to his lordship to have breakfast together. She asked neither for gems nor money. It was just a shared breakfast. But Theo didn't understand what such a small squirrel could eat for breakfast, so he thought about going to the forest for acorns. Suddenly, Yuna began to apologize for it. The Archduke was silent for too long, so the heroine acted this way. She was just hoping for a light breakfast chat that would help them get to know each other better. And then suddenly, Theo accepted. However, he suggested that it would be better to have lunch. The advisor was furious because they had woken him up so early. He didn't understand why his lordship urgently needed to replace the chef in the kitchen right at dawn. So, Yuli's guessed that everything was because of the Archduchess. Theo reminded him that Yuna is his wife now. They need to share a table from time to time. Yuli's sensed that the lord had taken an interest in that girl. Perhaps now the master can live a normal life. The advisor wanted to help and suggested that his lordship send Count Khan to the northern wall to solve the refugee problem. That will take 3 whole months, and that means Yuna will have no contact with him during all that time. The protagonist was surprised to learn from her uncle that, by order of her husband, she had to leave for the northern wall. Before leaving, Delkin wanted to discuss something. He asked his niece if they had consummated the marriage yet. The uncle asked bluntly if she had spent the night with the Archduke, causing the protagonist to blush instantly. Delkin became furious when he learned that nothing had happened yet. With that face, she could have dragged the lord to bed a long time ago. He should be guiding his niece, but instead he has to go to the northern wall for some refugees. That's why he told Yuna that her husband wouldn't like her if they hadn't consummated the marriage. She must seduce him immediately. Delkin suggested that she wear something provocative, something any man would desire to tear off instantly. Suddenly, a strange noise was heard. Yuna stopped to wonder what the hell that was. The uncle asked her to remember his advice, and with a promise that she understood, the protagonist went out to the large terrace. A nearby voice warned her that she would freeze soon. The Archduke threw his warrior tunic over the heroine. He explained to the young woman that if she caught a cold, unnecessary trouble would arise, and that must be avoided. Blushing, Yuna thanked the man. But the tunic was large, and Tia decided to cut off the sleeves with his sword. The protagonist immediately replied that she would simply fold them up, and everything would be fine. That something good should not be ruined. Tio held back a smile and asked if she had seen Delkin today. Yuna nodded and said that he was leaving for work matters. But in reality, Tio was aware of everything they discussed, because it could be perfectly heard from the hallway. I mean, he coincidentally overheard the whole conversation. If Delkin is not here, Theo said, she could turn to him for everything. But for some reason, the girl felt ashamed. Delkin explained that she just had to please him, and then the magic stones would flow into her hands. Suddenly, Yuna's stomach growled loudly. The main protagonist immediately began to apologize. She normally always had breakfast, but today she couldn't, and she hadn't eaten since yesterday. Theo's face instantly turned red. This girl was too adorable. Shortly after, the Northern Archduke was already sitting in his office, surrounded by imaginary birds, meditating on something. His subordinates didn't understand why he admired his fingers. Theo's personal physical therapist, David, was excited because the Lord had called him for the first time. Before, he had served as a field doctor. There, the hero repeatedly confirmed that spiritual wounds are harder to heal than physical ones. His lordship's wounds were very serious, because the master was indifferent to everything, as if he had no emotions. So, it must be something serious now. David asked about the severity of the symptoms, and Theo replied that it was serious. The personal physical therapist's eyes lit up, and he asked his lordship to describe his current state in more detail. In a confident tone, Theo reported that he had been cursed. Confusion appeared on the faces of the subordinates. They didn't understand who had dared to curse the Archduke. and the dark-haired man explained that he was domesticating someone. Theo explained that it was a long-tailed titmouse. It was very small and adorable, but the powerful northern archduke was convinced that this little bird had bewitched him. David asked what made him suspect a curse. Theo hit the table and exclaimed that he couldn't stop wanting to see her. He desperately wanted to keep her in his pocket and take her everywhere to admire her celestial beauty. Silence flooded the room. David did not expect to hear a story about a titmouse, but it must be said that, for the first time in a long time, his lordship showed emotions. So there was a clear improvement. David decisively exclaimed that yes, he was cursed. In normal circumstances, I would have prescribed a special magic antidote that would eliminate all magical effects. But first, the little bird must be shown to someone else. If the little bird is charmed, the magic of the spell will affect others too. If the Archduke himself understands that the tenderness is not caused by magic, it will be easier for him to recognize the change in his own character. Theo told David that this was his first truly useful recommendation. The physical therapist was happy to hear praise directed towards him. He left the room, and then the advisor asked his lord if he really believed Yuna was using magic. Ulysses would have also succumbed to the effects of the symptoms then, but they will discover the truth when they follow David's advice. The day of the hunt was approaching, and all those damned rich people would gather in one place. It is to them that His Highness, the Archduchess of the North, can be shown. All the preparation fell upon Julius. Theo also asked him to make sure Yuna was well bundled up. The advisor suddenly felt uncomfortable and assured his lord that he would supervise it. A couple of days later, Ulysses went out on the street with Yuna. He immediately noticed the girl's red hands and suggested she wear gloves. They had almost reached the hunting cabin, where the aristocrats who come once a month to hunt with the Archduke gather. Today was the first hunt. Yuna still did not know all the rules of local etiquette well. The advisor said that this river had not frozen completely yet, and that when that happened, one could skate on it. But Yuna didn't know what that was, and Ulysses promised to get a pair especially for her. They approached the little cabin, and the advisor opened the door for the girl. Inside, Yuna immediately noticed the presence of several men. One of them approached the protagonist and enthusiastically told her that she was truly beautiful, and that the servants were not lying. Most likely, the Archduke was very pleased. Ulysses asked the lords not to forget their manners, but they didn't understand what they had said wrong, as the girl was truly beautiful, so there was nothing improper in their words. They knew they had sold her in exchange for magic stones. That's why they started offering the young woman their own magic stones. The protagonist clenched her fist, because she found it unpleasant to hear those words directed at her. Ulysses indignantly asked what kind of things they were saying. The Archduke coldly asked what the hell they were doing there. The aristocrats were instantly frightened upon seeing the furious face of the Northern Archduke on the second floor, and they asked how long he had been there. Theo ordered Ulysses to accompany the girl to the second floor. The aristocrat, with a confused voice, suggested to his lordship that he should leave, but the Archduke coldly announced his cancellation. Then he abruptly grabbed the insolent man by the neck and lifted him with one hand. Theo promised him that he would not get away with this unharmed. The Archduke tightly grabbed the aristocrat's hand and asked if he had accumulated so many magic stones. Did he perhaps have more than the Archduke of the North? Immediately after, he threw the poor guy to the ground. Theo coldly ordered them to listen carefully at that moment. Now they had to leave and go away silently, or sacrifice the gems hidden from the empire to keep their limbs. The Archduke announced that whoever dared to tarnish the honor of the Archduchess would instantly lose their life. The aristocrats, seized by panic, fled immediately. The protagonist was sitting on the sofa, waiting for her husband. They had never humiliated her in that way before. Suddenly, the young woman heard a noise downstairs and began to worry that the Archduke would get into trouble because of her. But just at that moment, the man opened the door. Yuna was surprised to see him. He saw how the other aristocrats actually treated her. So now Theo certainly wouldn't consider her fit to be his wife. The man knelt in front of the girl and asked her to give him her hand. Confusion was reflected in Yuna's face. The Archduke explained that he thought he saw a wound on her hand, and Yuna looked surprised. Indeed, her hand had red marks from her nails. Theo applied an ointment of crushed healing stones, and everything healed quickly. He asked with concern if it hurt a lot. Instead of answering his question, the Archduke listened to his wife apologize for offending him because of her. Important people attended this hunt, and maintaining good relations with them is crucial. So the protagonist was very worried. But Tio asked her to remember that, in these lands, only he was above the Archduchess. In his domains, she could do whatever she wanted. Tio was the lord of these lands, and she, his lady. The protagonist paused to think about her husband's words. He was right, because she truly shouldn't fear anything thanks to her status as Archduchess of the North. But the unrest persisted. His lordship was her husband. She withdrew her hand, as that thought made her uncomfortable. From the girl's action, the man assumed that she was surely overwhelmed by the idea of having to stay there for life. Yuna asked if he was going hunting now. He unbuttoned his cape and explained that Yuli's had got him a home outfit. Theo froze instantly, unable to utter a word. This beautiful outfit was made especially for the occasion, so it would be a pity not to wear it. Until now, he had only seen her in loose dresses. At that moment, Theo found her so fragile. The Archduke slapped himself mentally, realizing what he was thinking, and ordered himself to compose himself. Yuna asked if she looked that strange. Theo denied her assumptions and asked if she had ever hunted. The girl nodded and excitedly said that she even knew how to use a slingshot. But she had never managed to hunt anything. She herself was like an adorable creature. Theo extended his hand and suggested they simply take a walk in the woods. The protagonist took his hand and, with a warm smile, replied to the Archduke that it was a wonderful idea. And that is how our protagonists did it. There were many flowers, but none had any scent. It is because they were cultivated with magic stones, artificial flowers without scent. Yuna suggested changing course, looking for another place, the scent of her hair. Our hero found it intoxicating. While she admired flowers, Theo thought, maybe it's good that they don't smell. A spell or not, it actually didn't matter. The Archduchess was simply beautiful. End of discussion. Suddenly, she suggested ice skating. Although she had no idea what that was, Theo explained to her that they are boots with blades underneath. But he worried about the harsh climate, to which Yuna was not accustomed. With a radiant smile, she asked, "Will you teach me to skate and to use a sled?" If she wished, he could certainly do it. Suddenly, Theo noticed her reddened hands. He cursed mentally. He should have brought her something to cover herself, something warm. Yuna pulled gloves out of her pocket and explained that Yuli's had given them to her. They were a bit big, but at least her hands were very warm in them. Then, the protagonist started telling how kind Yuli's was to her, and how attentive. Theo frowned instantly. Could it be the same Yuli's who kicked so many lords out of the council? That man was capable of using the dirtiest and cleverest tricks to win the war. Without stopping at anything, Yuli's constantly annoyed Theo with his sermons. And for some reason, Yuna considered him kind and attentive. Giulio felt a chill down his neck. A shiver ran through him, and he became uneasy. But he assumed it was just a draft. Theo understood that it was all because of the gift. The protagonist wanted to give her something, so that she would see him as kind and attentive. But nothing worked. The man racked his brains, thinking what to give her. He surely had something suitable on hand. Theo saw a red jewelry box, and upon opening it, discovered earrings with a large ruby. At that moment, Yuli's entered the office. He told him that he had dealt with the lords who stood out during the hunt. Noticing his master's fixed gaze, the advisor asked if something was wrong. But the Northern Archduke replied that he didn't doubt that such a good and attentive man had done everything well. Yuli's understood that it was all about the gloves. He suggested to his master to give the girl something and instantly noticed his mother's earrings. The advisor begged him to reconsider that decision, but Tio replied that the girl would not leave. And those earrings were much more valuable than simple cloth gloves. Julie knew she wouldn't convince that stubborn blockhead. The Archduke got up from the table, determined to deliver the gift right away. He approached the shelf and ordered his good and attentive advisor to leave immediately and stop getting in the way. Yuli's smiled, as if his master had been brought back to life. Tio carried the gift with a radiant smile. Upon reaching Yuna's door, he knocked immediately. The young woman asked him to wait a second, and Tio waited anxiously for her to come out. But when she did, he froze. Yuna was wearing a very revealing outfit. Just by seeing her, the Archduke felt a sudden heat and didn't understand what kind of magic that was. The girl started covering herself with her hands, thinking it was the maid. Theo declared that, from now on, he only wanted to see her in those pajamas. Although he only thought it, he didn't say it out loud. Theo explained that he came to deliver something, but since it wasn't a good time, he promised to return later. But Yuna grabbed his hand and begged him to stay. She replied that she wasn't uncomfortable at all. The man understood that it was a terrible curse controlling her body. Everything in that room belonged to Yuna, and Tia told her she could take whatever she wanted. In that robe, she looked like a delicate ball of cotton candy. Tio handed her a small jewelry box. The protagonist's face filled with surprise when she opened it and saw its contents. The girl, confused, asked if he was really giving that to her, and he felt somewhat embarrassed. But Yuna had no idea what to wish for. She was truly happy with the gift. As soon as Yuna thanked the man, a warm smile appeared on the protagonist's face upon seeing her so happy. He was glad she liked it. The protagonist paused, thinking about something. If she and the Archduke kept getting closer like this, perhaps one day they would be a normal couple and live happily. Yuna wished that would happen soon. A week later, they were having lunch together. The protagonist's personal maid, named Ray, let out a heavy sigh. At 12 years old, she went to war instead of her sick older brother to defend the country and the honor of her family. The other knights constantly mocked her, but the Archduke personally offered to teach her how to handle a sword. In the end, Ray helped the man win the war, and she was named an honorary knight of the great empire. But with sorrow, she realized that her lord was incapable of feeling joy. Ray decided to retire and follow him to the castle. She was going to dedicate her life to serving her family. But her lord had already lost 3 wives, and she started to get nervous. Although the new lady had a truly kind heart, with a woman like that by his side, her lord might find happiness. Ray thought so, but she was furious because today the Northern Archduke seemed very upset. Yuna loved the beautiful garden. She asked the man what his favorite flowers were, but he, without showing any emotion, replied that he didn't like flowers, and that infuriated Ray even more. Yuna suggested having tea, but Tio said he would ask for it to be brought to his office. Sadness immediately appeared on the girl's face. The advisor looked intently at the Archduchess, and noticing her ear without earrings, he assumed that his lordship was upset about that. He whispered an idea into Ray's ear. The girl suggested applying shock therapy, but the advisor replied that they must first move his lordship away. Ray quickly invented a false excuse to ask his lordship to retire. Theo stood up and informed Yuna that he would be away for a moment. Ulis approached the girl and asked permission to ask her an indiscreet question. The protagonist, of course, agreed, and then the advisor asked if his lordship had given her anything expensive the night before. She nodded, and the man revealed that those earrings had been worn by the late Archduchess. Now the jewelry is just a memory of his mother. It was very precious to the Archduke. The protagonist understood her crucial mistake and asked the advisor what to do in this complicated situation. In reality, she had a reason. Ray was following her lord. Theo asked the maid if she planned to stab him in the back, because it showed on her face. She indignantly asked, why is he so distant with the lady? Had she somehow displeased him? But the dark-haired man immediately replied that it wasn't that, and probably. He was the one the Archduchess disliked. But few people like cold people. Tio asked if the lady had ever mentioned those earrings. Rael asked the lord if he was referring to the ruby earrings of his late mother. Now he understood the reason for the lord's bad mood. But it wasn't worth getting offended over that. Reese suggested that the lady was saving the valuable jewel for a special occasion, so the lord should apologize. Suddenly, Yuna caught up with them. Trying to catch her breath, she told them she needed to tell them something. Yuna held out a jewelry box and explained that they had clarified everything for her, and that those earrings were actually a memory of his late mother. Now she couldn't accept them. Theo was not surprised that such a gift made her uncomfortable. Enough. First she accepted them, and now Theo apologized for the trouble caused. But he still asked Yuna to keep them. But the protagonist exclaimed that she couldn't wear them. The dark-haired man started when the young woman suddenly approached and looked him straight in the eyes. She explained to him that she simply didn't have pierced ears. It turns out Yuna only has a mole on her lobe. To wear those jewels, the protagonist needs to pierce her ears first. But she can't do it alone. But she is eager to show off those rubies as soon as possible. So she asked her husband, in a pleading voice, if he would help her. The Northern Archduke asked again if she was sure, and she nodded. After all, she had always wanted to wear earrings. It was right here that Dad left her a mark, like a sting. But in reality, it was a red mark on the saint's body. The protagonist excitedly told the man that she asked him because she truly trusted him. He touched her chin and told her he was going to start. Theo was so close that it made Yuna blush. It must hurt a little, but the hero promised to do it as quickly as possible. And Yuna just had to bear it for a little while. He brought the needle close to her ear. The protagonist closed her eyes tightly, feeling the pain. It started to bleed, and Tio stopped immediately, asking the young woman with concern if she was okay. He stood up abruptly, deciding to call the doctor anyway. But Yuna, with a smile, remembered that the other ear still needed piercing and that she could try it. However, Tio decided to take care of that task himself. After a while, everything was ready and perfect. The protagonist put on the earrings and asked for his opinion, and he, spellbound, said they were beautiful. Suddenly, his eyes popped wide open. At that moment, the memory of his mother hit him hard. He also relived that intense emotion he felt at that time, even though so much time had passed. Disregarding the heavy snowfall, he tried to scream for his mom with all his might. But his mother lay unconscious in the middle of the immense whiteness. A little earlier, Karen Rose had promised her son that she would return soon, so the defense of their lands passed temporarily into his hands. She was more of a warrior than a ruler, but during a mission, she died serving the empire. That great woman dedicated her life to mastering the North, and in the end, gave it up for the duchy. Theo had to make sure her death was not in vain. To protect her legacy, he had to become stronger. Time passed, and in the end, the ruby earrings were the only thing that reminded him that Karen Rose had lived there. Theo had never given them much importance, but now pain flooded him, although it faded when he saw the new owner. The man wanted to confess to Juna that he was happy she was his wife, but he stumbled and only thanked her. In reality, only her relatives called her that, so it pleased her that the Archduke was also wearing them. The man told her that he had no nicknames and everyone called him Tio, so she could do it too. The protagonist, of course, agreed. That Tio gifting her the family jewel surely meant he already saw her as his wife. In the blink of an eye, affectionate nicknames would arrive, and then they would turn into Mommy and Daddy. However, the protagonist knew there was still a long way to go, but the thought in his head made him smile. The next day, Yuna and Ray went out to the garden. It didn't freeze all year thanks to the magic stones, so it constantly needed weeding, or everything would be overgrown with weeds. Yuna mentioned that rue flowers have a very sweet scent. Maybe one day they could visit that place together. But the heroine remembered her uncle's words. Don't mention rouge too much, so as not to seem strange. For now, she could only send him letters. Yuna was curious to know if her last letter had already arrived. In it, there was a common greeting, some words about his lordship's bravery, and that he was the most handsome man in the north. Although, perhaps she had exaggerated a bit. Ray noticed something strange, but Yuna hastily explained that she was just thinking about her own things. Sometimes the protagonist wished to turn back time, but then the maid saw her lord among the bushes. Apparently, he was trying to hide. Ray immediately started waving her hand to signal the Archduke to hide. The protagonist started thinking about sending another letter to her father, but this time carefully choosing her words. Theo understood that she missed her home, but did Yuna regret her choice and now want to go back? He was not going to allow it. And that's why Yuna's personal maid was astonished when the man abruptly stood up from the bushes. The heroine immediately turned around upon hearing the noise, but Ray hastily asked her not to pay attention to him. She suggested to her lady that she show her a beautiful flower. Yuna was just starting to call him by name, and now was he suddenly going to annul the marriage? That was Tio's conclusion, but he wasn't going to allow it. Yuna was his wife now. 2 months had passed since Yuna's arrival. She ate quite well and did not scorn the local food, always asking for her compliments to be passed on to the chef. Every day she walked in the garden. Tio had already assumed she had forgotten about going home. That's why he didn't expect the girl to be so eager to leave. It takes a month to reach Ruhai. Suddenly, it occurred to the man that he could recreate the settlement of Ruhai right there in the duchy. He could even move Yuna's tribespeople there. He remembered that Yuna had married him for the magic stones, so Tio would give her even more stones. Surely the girl wouldn't go anywhere and would stay with him until the end of her days. If the emperor or the Khan interfered, he would simply destroy them. Unexpectedly, a female voice called Tio. The dark-haired man hid the magic stone behind his back, smiling at Yuna. With a cup of tea, he asked her if it had been hard for her to come up. But Yuna replied that it was nothing serious. She didn't want to distract him from his important matters, willing to sacrifice for it. Tio's face instantly lit up. The young woman extended her hands, inviting him to look. The man noticed the Archduchess's hands, delicate, white, and incredibly soft. Yuna said she found it in the garden and suggested he smell it. Theo immediately agreed to do so. The protagonist felt the man's lips, now so close to her hands. His breath tickled her fingers. Theo said that an infusion for the sick could be prepared from that plant. These petals grew in the valley near Yuna's house in Rue. That's why she was so happy to find them in the Archduke's garden. Dad always collected and prepared them when she caught a cold. When Yuna remembered her home, her eyes lit up. That's why the man decided to give her a lot of magic stones tomorrow, and Yuna suddenly asked if he would mind her going there. Tio asked if she really wanted that, and the girl explained that she only needed equipment for drying. The protagonist suggested going together. Although Tio was distracted from the main point, he liked this idea. He could leave the duchy for a long period and not worry about anything, as Yuli's would do an excellent job as a substitute. Theo nodded and announced that he would ask the advisor to prepare everything. They will be traveling for at least a month, so preparations are needed. But the protagonist only talked about the local market. It's not that far. There was no need for so much preparation. They say many delicacies are sold there. The man froze as he processed the girl's words. The next day, Ray explained to the lady that there would be many people in the market, so she must not stray from his lordship. And she must be careful. Yuna promised she would bring back many delicious things. As soon as everything was ready, Ray handed the lady over to Yuli's. The advisor asked his lordship to get into the carriage, explaining that the lord would appear soon. The girl thanked Yuli's with a smile. The man closed the door and looked around, thinking the lord should hurry up. The protagonist assumed Theo had a lot of work today. That's why he was taking so long right now. But still, it was great that they were going together. Maybe they would even manage to hold hands. The carriage door burst open, and the Archduke immediately apologized to the young woman for making her wait. Today, in his opinion, Yuna looked more like a little rabbit. The man explained that he had almost finished all his business. Truthfully, there wasn't that much work today. However, Theo must maintain the image of an important man in front of his wife. Yuli's announced that they were leaving. Yuna noticed that Theo was different today. His hair was combed, he had a new cut, and he was even wearing a tie, which he hates wearing. The girl explained that she needed equipment specifically for drying leaves. She also wanted to buy sweets. Suddenly, the carriage hit a small stone. The carriage stopped immediately, and advisor Yuli's worriedly asked if the lord and the lady were all right. He apologized if, somehow, it had scared them. At that moment, Yuna was already in the man's arms. The protagonist's face instantly blushed due to the closeness to this young woman, and his heart began to beat faster. At that moment, he smelled a sweet floral scent. They had to let her go, but now. But the dark-haired man's lips began to slowly approach the girl, who did not object, and she was already closing her eyes. And then bam! Ulysses interrupted by shouting if they were okay. Theo mentally chose to play deaf. He hoped Yuna hadn't heard anything with her ears covered. But she, suddenly, proposed answering the advisor. The Archduke announced that they could proceed. Now the protagonists were sitting together, hesitant, not daring to hold hands. The heroine gathered courage and gently brushed against the young man's hand, causing him a shiver. Tio's face instantly flushed. The Archduke understood. This was his chance. The man, summoning his courage, decided to take Yuna's hand. But Yuli's announced their arrival to his lordship. And our heroes separated instantly, sitting facing each other. The girl asked confusedly why there wasn't a single soul in the market. Theo thoughtfully replied that he didn't even know. The protagonist pointed to a tea shop and suggested the Archduke go there, to which he, of course, agreed. Yuli's assumed that this shouldn't take much time. They needed to finish in 2 hours. Since the lord closed the entire market to the citizens, commerce in the city completely stopped. And people now have to wait. Lord Theo promised they would try to be as quick as possible. But still, it was encouraging to see them happy. The merchant wished them a lord, and Milady a good day after they left the shop. Now they had everything they needed. Yuna suggested taking a look somewhere else. The merchant seemed terrified, but the protagonist expected nothing less. No wonder he had closed the market to the public during his visit. Theo didn't want Yuna to notice the panic he inspired. The protagonist pointed to a candy stall and told him she wanted to try them. There were strawberries, tangerines, and even peaches. The little girl selling all that was surprised by the man's height. Her mother had warned her that if she misbehaved, the Archduke would kidnap her, and now she was scared. Yuna asked the little seller to advise her on what to choose. The little girl looked at the beautiful woman spellbound. The girl said the strawberry was very tasty, but she preferred tangerines, and her brother preferred apples. Then, Yuna asked Tio which ones would be better to choose. The man replied that they would take everything. The protagonist chuckled and told the Archduke that if they ate all those sweets, they surely wouldn't have dinner. Therefore, they decided to try the strawberries and tangerines. The people behind the protagonists started whispering upon seeing the Archduke. He literally tore people apart alive, but next to the beautiful Archduchess, he looked like a boy madly in love. The little girl handed the sweets to the lady. Yuna thanked the girl for helping her with her choice. The protagonist noticed that the young seller seemed a bit pale, but the girl hastily replied that she just needed to sit down. All of this was the Archduke's fault. Yuna told her they could look after the stall while she rested. The little girl promised she would be back soon. The smile didn't leave the protagonist's face, but just as the girl walked away, the young woman admitted to the man that she now felt a bit uneasy. Today everything was deserted, and there was no one in the shops. Now Tio felt guilty. He didn't want Yuna to be upset, so he told his advisor to open the doors immediately. As soon as a minute passed, the market was full of people. Yuna hoped someone would want to buy fruit. A boy saw a candy stall and asked his father to buy him fruit, but the man was stunned to see the Archduke. Just as the boy ran towards the stall, Yuna offered him a taste. The boy's father, frightened, asked for a peach, and the protagonist immediately fulfilled his request. Thanking them for the purchase, Tio wished them enjoyment. At this rate, the day passed in a flash. Everything was going well. It's just that the protagonist didn't understand why the citizens feared the Archduke. If he was very kind, Yuna decided she had to behave more naturally. So she handed Tio a strawberry and suggested he try it. Her hand slid gently towards his. While she said that this strawberry was truly delicious, Theo was completely paralyzed instantly. The protagonist slowly, very slowly approached. In the end, the man tasted the sugared strawberry, although he didn't really like them. But he did it for Yuna. The protagonist suggested they should go back to the market another day. Theo did not object to this idea at all. Night fell and the Archduke was in his office, by the window, reviewing the day's events. Yuna was the first to take his hand. She couldn't believe he liked it too. Theo decided to celebrate the first contact of their hands and immediately opened a special wine. Saved for an important occasion, Yulis entered the office and reported that they bought everything the merchants couldn't sell at dusk. The people were very grateful for the Archduke's initiative. A rumor even spread among the citizens that his lordship himself cared about the well-being of the people. Then, Yulis showed a report about the Khan's count, who apparently contacted the high priest of the Daphne temple. Theo began to study the report attentively. This seemed suspicious, and Yulis confirmed that assumption. That same meeting took place at the Eye of the Storm. The main temple of the goddess Daphne was located in the center of the Eye of the Storm, on top of a mountain where a fury has roared since time immemorial. Only chosen priests are allowed entry there. Before leaving the temple, he will have to lose all memories of the time spent inside. Delcan contacted the priest to get information about the saint. The high priest said that the Archduchess is the saint. The saint is full of the goddess's light, pure as snow and radiant as the sun. And she is recognized by a red mark on her ear. When her essence is revealed, everyone around her will understand her destiny. Her Excellency received the mark after the coming-of-age ceremony, and then the change of seasons began on Rue Island. Not far from the Eye of the Storm, they found a stone with text in the Rue language, but not even Delkin could figure out all the details. Her Excellency also didn't notice any stone when she rushed to save her mother. Yulis reported that he would first contact the inhabitants of Rue. Theo didn't understand why. Of all places, precisely the Eye of the Storm, the Archduke's advisor. Climbing the spiral staircase, he asked with a tired voice his younger sister, Malin, to wait a moment. She stopped and asked if he was exhausted already. Yulis reminded him that he had office work and mountains of paperwork. Malin called him Velucho and asked him to tell her about the Archduchess. What was she like? And Yulis described her as kind-hearted. And the Archduke worries a lot about her. The man's younger sister had heard that they had even gone to the city recently, and they had a romantic date there. But Yulis only asked her not to chatter nonsense. Then he knocked on His Highness's door. The Archduke's advisor informed his lady that he had brought her a new maid, and the lady immediately allowed her to enter. Ray was carefully combing her hair. The protagonist greeted the new girl. Malin immediately introduced herself to Her Highness and promised to take her duties very seriously. Yuna thanked the girl in advance for her work. In reality, Malin was a little angry with her older brother, who hadn't even hinted that the Archduchess was a beauty. It was Malin's first day of work. Ray reported that, in that case, she would return to her duties at the training ground. Malin offered to continue taking care of the hair instead of Ray. She told her lady that today she was simply irresistible, especially her hair, that she loved it like the first snowfall. But surely Yuna had been told that many times already. Then, Malin suggested to her lady that she go for a walk with the Archduke during the snowfall. They say that if you see the first snow with your beloved, the love will last forever. It was a precious moment, overflowing with pure romance. A smile lit up our protagonist's face. She longed to be a real couple with the Archduke, and in her innocence, believed it was possible. During the walk, Yuna asked how the inhabitants of Phoenix had fun. Perhaps they had exciting festivals and fairs. The Archduke often traveled for work, and Yuna dreamed of accompanying him someday. Hearing this, Malin felt an urgent need to share her wisdom. She promised to prepare a list of the most emblematic festivals and places in Phoenix. Yuna suggested going back and taking a look at the White Tower on the way. The Archduke approached and asked if they were leaving already. The heroine was happy to see Theo. She asked if he had also decided to go for a walk, to which the man replied with a slight smile that he wanted to breathe fresh air. Besides, he thought it would be nice to walk together. Theo noticed an unknown girl, and Malin introduced herself immediately. The protagonist apologized to his lordship and explained that Malin and she had already decided to go to the White Tower. But actually, the tower was black. Theo explained that when it snows, the snow makes the tower's roof look white, and the residents take it as a sign of the arrival of winter. Yuna asked when the first snow would fall. She needed to invite Theo for a walk, but unexpectedly, the man said he didn't know and hoped it wouldn't snow at all. He hated snow and was already fed up with the color white. Yuna, confused, asked if the first snowfall wasn't a good thing, but the Archduke replied severely that there was no such thing as good snow, leaving the girls stunned. Suddenly, Yuna turned around and announced she was leaving, as white was so unpleasant to her. Malin immediately apologized to the Lord. The protagonist was bewildered, not understanding why Yuna had reacted so exaggeratedly. A little later, Yulis asked if he could present a report. Theo, with a stern look, allowed it. The advisor was sure his lordship already knew, but the Archduchess hadn't left the tower all day. She asked for the food to be brought to her chambers. The Lord sternly asked why she wasn't going out for walks anymore. In this situation, a bad look from the advisor and he would lose his head today. He was sure of that. Yulis replied that, in a way, the young woman could be understood. She didn't want to run into Theo, that's why she wasn't going out. The man didn't understand the reasons, and then Yulis asked what color his lordship's hair was. Theo replied white, and the advisor reported that snow is also white. Yesterday, his lordship said he couldn't stand the color of snow, and his lordship supposed that a version also included his hair. Lord Theo was indignant, and Yulis added that she was guided by that logic. Everyone said the Archduchess's hair was white as snow. Lord Theo rushed towards his advisor and asked indignantly what all this meant. For the hero, Yuna's hair was not just white. It had a warm glow. Yulis agreed, but what mattered was how Yuna had taken it. He calmly approached the door and announced that perhaps she was leaving already. The protagonist couldn't leave things like that. So, full of determination, he went to his chair and took the ketta, deciding to urgently talk to Yuna. After knocking on the door, the man asked if she was there. There was no response, and then the Archduke explained to the young woman that he needed to tell her something right now. That's why he wanted to see her, to talk. Finally, Yuna opened the door and allowed him to enter. The man was speechless when he saw Yuna wrapped in some kind of furry blanket that hid almost her entire body, except for her face. He asked her to sit down, and the girl allowed it. Theo suggested she remove the blanket, but Yuna refused. If the Archduke didn't like her hair because it reminded him of snow, then she clearly shouldn't. The man immediately approached and pulled the blanket off the girl's head. He explained that he had never thought her hair resembled snow. Theo confessed that he actually thinks they are very beautiful, and upon hearing these words, the protagonist's eyes filled with surprise. The Archduke apologized to Yuna for offending her, but the girl herself asked for forgiveness for not understanding everything correctly. The protagonist confessed that he actually feels constantly awkward around her, and Yuna asked for the reasons. Theo was ashamed of having forced her to stay in the north. Yuna asked him why he didn't like snow. The protagonist was stunned to learn that the Archduke of the North's beloved mother had died because of snow. Initially, the Empire had few magic crystals. They were always insufficient, so the people of Phoenix constantly froze. Then, the Kingdom of Bayo promised that if they investigated the Eye of the Storm, they would lift the restrictions on the import of magic crystals. The Eye of the Storm was where a snow blizzard always raged. The chances of returning alive were minimal. However, Theo's mother, Archduchess Karen Rose, went directly to the eye of the storm to help her people. The man said that he barely managed to find her body, because by the time he arrived, the snow had almost buried it. That's exactly why Theo hated snow, because if it weren't for it, the man would have arrived in time to save his mother. Yuna replied quietly that she was very sorry. Theo smiled and said that everything was fine. The protagonist froze and looked at the man in surprise when he extended his hand and gently touched the earrings on her ears. Yuna wearing those ornaments brought him comfort. Then Theo stood up and asked the girl to rest. Suddenly, Yuna asked if he hadn't secretly been drinking again, and the Archduke stopped immediately, freezing in place. The secret is that Yuna constantly watched him through the crack in the door. The heroine proposed to the man that they drink together. The Archduke was surprised by the girl's suggestion. Theo looked so sad when telling his story that the protagonist felt a huge urge to cheer him up. Alcohol lifts the spirits and gives the courage to do what, otherwise, one would never dare. Images instantly started popping into Theo's mind. He hurried to discard them and asked the girl if she had ever drunk before. Yuna nodded and said she drank a glass of wine while sailing on the boat. Tonight, the protagonist definitely wouldn't say no to some courage. And so, he accepted the girl's proposal. Theo hoped he hadn't taken too long choosing the drink. He noticed his reflection in the window and realized he was starting to lose his shape. So tomorrow he must train without fail. Upon entering the room, the man immediately apologized for the long wait. But Yuna was already fast asleep. The girl spent the whole day cleaning the tower. The man didn't mind that she slept, so he decided to watch her sleep and lay down next to her. Yuna was beautiful even while sleeping. Suddenly, Theo noticed a strand of hair in her mouth. It was just a small strand, so the hero decided to touch her to remove it. There was nothing wrong with that. Suddenly, Yuna turned towards him. Now their lips were very close. The protagonist's face instantly flushed, because the girl's breathing was pushing him to the limit. He decided to immediately pull away. But suddenly, Yuna snuggled against his leg. Since he was born, no one had provoked him like this. A short time later, the protagonist slowly opened her eyes, not quite understanding what was happening. She realized she had dozed off for a while. Then Yuna understood what had happened, and her eyes snapped open. The protagonist started apologizing to Theo, trying to explain that she didn't realize she had fallen asleep. Theo simply replied that it was okay. He suggested they try the wine. But suddenly, Malin entered and greeted his lordship, not noticing the Archduke at first. Only then did she notice the lord's stern gaze. Malin instantly blushed and apologized. The protagonist was perplexed. She thought only a little time had passed, but it was already daytime. Theo stood up and proposed leaving the wine for another occasion. Yuna took the man's hand and suggested they have dinner together that very night. That way they could open the wine. The protagonist felt she had to try that alcohol Theo had chosen. Malin apologized once more to the Archduchess, but Yuna simply replied that she shouldn't worry. An idea crossed the protagonist's mind, and she asked her maid to tell her what her lord's mother was like. The girl recounted that Karen Rose was a great woman. His lordship did everything possible to bring her back home. When he rode alone to the eye of the storm, chaos broke out, and many thought he wouldn't return. Fortunately, the knights managed to find him and return him to the castle. However, after this incident, the lord longed for combat. The protagonist supposed that, in Theo's place, she would also hate the snow if she had to go through something like that. Now, Yuna decided to reciprocate the man's kindness. She went to see him in a beautiful outfit. The protagonist asked the Archduke if she could sit next to him, and of course, the dark-haired man agreed. During dinner, Yuna recounted how her day had been. She spent the entire day cleaning the lower level of the tower. Although it wasn't part of the Archduchess's responsibilities, Yuna considered it important, and she told the man that her room would be there. Due to the lack of windows, it was a very cozy place. An image suddenly appeared in the man's mind. His face instantly lit up, turning red, but he quickly recovered and bam. He realized that Yuna was much braver than he thought. Suddenly, the girl blurted out that they could hide there from the snow, because now she couldn't stand it either. So, during the first snowfall, they can take refuge. To avoid being locked in the same room, they can walk around the tower. Out of the blue, the protagonist, with a sad tone, asked the man if he became melancholic when it snowed. She didn't want him to be alone during those moments. Moreover, Yuna felt a huge urge to get to know Theo better. A warm smile lit up the Archduke's face, and he confessed to the young woman that he also wanted to get to know her. And a lot. Then, Yuna said her mother died soon, and she grew up with her father. He didn't like talking about his mother, Every time the protagonist was curious to know something about her mother, she would light a bonfire on the seashore. In front of it, the father became more communicative. When winter arrives, Tio proposed lighting a bonfire too. He poured wine into a glass and, with a warm smile, explained that it would be easier to be sincere with each other that way. Yuna looked at her reflection. If one winter night she finds herself next to Tio in front of the fire, at that moment she will ask if she can be his wife for real. The Archduke proposed a toast to the arrival of winter. Suddenly, Yulis burst into the office. Tio wanted to protest, but the advisor informed him that they had a guest. He said he came from Rue Island and introduced himself as Azorim, adding that His Highness knew him well. Yuna exclaimed happily that he was her friend. She asked him to come see her, and Tio replied that he would follow right away. The protagonist ran out, humming a tune to herself. The advisor asked His Highness if he was aware that the Archduchess's friend was a man. Azarim turned when he heard Yuna's voice. He was the heir of the Apan tribe on Rue Island. The protagonist ran towards the man and hugged him tightly, to which Azarim responded by tightly hugging the young woman. The man told her he was very eager to see her. Tio froze seeing them holding hands. They hugged and held hands so naturally, but the Northern Archduke didn't know if that was normal. Yuna introduced Tio to her childhood friend. The man's face looked very tense. Azarim confidently approached the Archduke and greeted him respectfully, extending his hand in a sign of friendship. Immediately after, Azarim introduced himself to Yuna's husband. The girl immediately apologized to the Archduke for her friend's lack of manners. Yuna explained to Azarim that he was Archduke Phoenix, and the man extended his hand again, saying it was a pleasure to meet him. Theo didn't want Yuna to feel uncomfortable, so in the end he shook his hand. But the man couldn't forgive this guy for hugging Yuna, so he squeezed Azarim's hand tightly. Yuna's friend asked if this man was a bear because he was huge. However, they were speaking in another language, and Tio, with a strained smile, asked the girl to translate for him. The protagonist indignantly asked her childhood friend if he could speak normally and switch to the common language already. Suddenly, Azarim announced that he was already hungry. Theo took it as an opportunity to show Yuna how generous he was as a husband and how restrained he was as a lord, ignoring his friend's familiarity. So he told Azarim that, of course, he would feed him. His wife's dear friend could feel at home. A slight confusion appeared on Azarim's face. As soon as they sat down at the table, the protagonist asked her friend how the village was, and if the weather had worsened significantly. Azarin reassured her, telling her not to worry. The man suddenly asked if the food was already gone. He pointed at the Archduke and explained he meant his empty plate, but the girl asked him not to point. Theo mentally called this guy a bastard, since His Highness had already eaten. He could leave, because Azarin wanted to talk about many things with his childhood friend. But the Archduke replied irritably that he would stay. He ordered Yulis to bring more food. The Archduke wasn't going to leave those two alone, so he was going to eat until dinner threatened to spill over. Yuna explained that Tio liked to eat a lot. She recounted how much she had missed them all during this time. Her friend, with a warm smile, confessed that he missed her immensely, because Yuna never left his mind for a single moment. Sarim deeply regretted letting her go at that time. The Archduke angrily squeezed his fork, while Yuna affirmed that she was very well off there. She already had two friends, Ray and Millen, and his lordship's secretary, Ulis, was always ready to help her. And besides, Tio was very kind to her. Yuna couldn't express in words how grateful she was. Tio replied that it couldn't be otherwise, so she shouldn't thank him, and if she needed anything, he would take care of it. Azarim said he was glad to hear that his lordship was good to Yuna. The Archduke understood that there was a reason behind this visit. Yuna's friend revealed that, if it weren't for the Lord of the North, she would have married him, because marriage between heirs is natural. Theo replied that in their language, that is called dog nonsense. That expression was used to describe something that makes no sense at all. Frowning, Yuna indignantly asked her childhood friend why he brought up that topic. She didn't understand what had happened to him at that moment. Azarin apologized and explained that he only wanted to test him. In another language, the man explained to his friend that everything was necessary to check her true essence. Yuna wanted to be a good wife for Theo, but the situation was very awkward. Azarin looked down and apologized. The joke went too far. He thanked him for his concern for Yuna, and the tense Archduke replied that it was part of his duty as a husband. Yuna always said she liked reliable men. It was already quite late, so Tio proposed finishing dinner. Azarim told his friend that he already missed when they chatted about everything. But Tia reported that the guest rooms were in another location. Yuna's friend was about to say he was staying overnight. But the Lord forbade it. The protagonist proposed to her friend to talk tomorrow. Theo was getting increasingly irritated by this whole situation. After a while, he slammed a bottle of the most expensive alcohol he had onto the table. The man already hated that damned bastard. He feared Yuna would get angry and leave for home. Suddenly, the Phoenix Archduke heard a noise, as if someone had thrown a small stone at the window. And he became alert. It was Yuna, who was waving at him. It turned out she had forgotten to give him something. It was Yaza leaf tea. Tio was surprised that Yuna came for something like that, and she replied that she really wanted him to try it first. Yuna thanked the man for being so lenient with Azarim that day. The Archduke smiled and promised to try the tea without fail. Deep in the night, Azarim was walking down the hallway. He froze as soon as a voice behind him ordered him to stop. The Archduke, with a cold gaze that could intimidate the bravest, asked Azarim where he was going at this hour. The man declared that he did not allow them to call him by his name, and their Azarim showed his true colors. The Archduke repeated his question, and Azarim instantly replied that he couldn't sleep, so he wanted to see Yuna right now. Tio coldly asked where he was returning home to. Azarim replied nonchalantly that at first he was only going to see Yuna, and then he would leave the continent immediately. However, now he understood that he had to stay longer. The Archduke reminded him that an heir should not be away from his lands for so long. But Azarim said he had become heir on purpose because he wanted to marry Yuna. He regretted that his beloved had to marry someone like the Northern Archduke, that he wanted to control everything by force. Azarim was indignant that it was Theo who offered the magic stones in exchange for his wife. The Archduke smiled mockingly and recalled that they themselves had accepted. But the chestnut-haired man objected from the beginning, and Delkin always seemed like a slippery guy to him. But in the end, Azarim let Yuna leave home, so now he couldn't complain. Azarim concluded that the Archduke only uses his need and desperation as an excuse. That's why he keeps Yuna here. Now the chestnut-haired man understood why the main condition was marriage, but the Archduke declared that he would only let him leave alive for her sake. Azarim exclaimed that they would meet tomorrow in the training arena, and Yuna must not know under any circumstances. In the village, Azarim was very popular among the girls. The protagonist asked Malin if his lordship looked like a true aristocrat. The personal maid was stunned by such a question. Yuna exclaimed enthusiastically that his lordship was very handsome and had attractive facial features, and aristocratic ones. But Malin knew the Archduke from a slightly different perspective. Suddenly, she asked where Ray was, and Yuna replied that she would be a little late today. It is said that a very important event will take place in the training arena today, so she is there now. The knights surrounded Azarim and began to interrogate him. The man told them stories of how he managed to take down a bear with a single dagger. Azarim added that today he had chatted with the maids, who happened to be very interested in knights. He promised to introduce them if they wished. The Archduke coldly asked why they weren't training. Azarim informed the lord that he was late and admitted that he had already started thinking he wouldn't come today. Without further ado, Tio threw a wooden sword at his rival. He suggested Azarim be thankful the sword wasn't real. The knights immediately whispered. His Excellency hadn't fought in a long time, but this guy seemed self-assured. Azarim took a fighting stance and asked his opponent why he was afraid. But Tio calmly replied that he was just thinking about how to beat him, so he could at least walk after the fight. The chestnut-haired man gripped the hilt of the sword. Those words infuriated him. He decided to see what the Archduke would say now and attacked first, confident in his strength. But Tio was able to dodge easily. Then Azarin launched another blow, which was blocked. The Archduke's eyes widened as his opponent, with a complacent smile, informed him that Yuna would not be happy there. Such a cruel man could not be near her. Those words caused Tio to let his guard down, and Azarin managed to hit him in the side. The man thought that having Yuna in such a cold place was simply cruel, but the Archduke calmly asked his rival if he was done talking, or if he was going to say something else. Tio proposed finishing quickly, hitting the chestnut-haired man a bit and letting him go. Then, he was the one who started attacking. He stated that 3 blows would be enough. An instant later, Azarin crashed onto the floor. He was stunned when the wooden sword broke in his hands, which meant the duel was over, and he had lost. The Archduke declared that was enough. As Azarim imagined, This guy possesses unimaginable strength. He wanted His Highness to offer him a hand, but Tio just turned away indifferently, showing his total disinterest. Azarim got up and announced that he was going to see Yuna. Seeing the Archduke's look of disgust, the chestnut-haired man asked if he was perhaps forbidding him from doing so. Yulis burst into the office and asked Tio with concern if he was all right. The advisor was informed that the master had been in the training arena, and his opponent had received his just deserts. Yulis was scared when he saw blood on his master's hand, but the Archduke calmly asked him to calm down. Azarim turned out to be quite good, and it wasn't just empty boasting. He is fast and knows how to destabilize the opponent. The Archduke deliberately allowed him to touch him a couple of times, before finally snatching the weapon from his hands. Yuna was too easy for Tio, so that chestnut-haired man deserved a consolation prize. Azarim's words echoed in the dark-haired man's head. All those complaints were empty, but he still wouldn't let Yuna go. If the chestnut-haired man wanted to see his beloved, he could go look at her as much as he wanted. Azarim froze, realizing that the Archduke was truly crazy. Tio was sitting in his office, reading a document. He immediately grimaced at the sharp pain that suddenly arose in his left arm, as if a sharp knife pierced his flesh. Maybe he really shouldn't have held back and just gotten rid of all the trash. Azarim burst into the office and exclaimed that because of him, he couldn't see Yuna. But Tio just calmly reminded him of elementary manners. He smiled mockingly and dismissed the chestnut-haired man. Was he offended by the small reprimand? Although he knew that wasn't it. The Archduke explained that his room and Yuna's were connected by a bridge. Therefore, Azarim will have to deal with him every time. The chestnut-haired man, his face contorted with displeasure, exclaimed indignantly that he suspected from the start that he had locked Yuna in the tower. Yuna unexpectedly entered the office. She was surprised to see Azarim there. The protagonist told the Archduke that something terrible had happened and that the staircase to her room had literally collapsed. But Tio reassured her, saying it was all the workers' fault. The collapse happened while Yuna was cleaning on the first floor. The Archduke begged her not to even think Yuna was at fault, because he should have checked the state of the tower more carefully. But the danger had already passed. Yuna asked her friend what they had been talking about with the Archduke. She knew it. They would both find common ground. One night was enough for them to become friends. Azarim was stunned when his lord confirmed these words. Yuna apologized for interrupting the conversation and announced she was leaving. As soon as the Archduke asked confusedly where she was going, the protagonist replied that she and Malin were planning to work in the garden today. Although the servants could take care of it, Yuna loved it. Unexpectedly, Azarim offered to help. Hearing this, the Archduke confidently declared that then he would also go with them. He smiled and informed the chestnut-haired man that he too could use some exercise. Malin suggested a place where the lady could plant flowers. The protagonist asked the two young men if a table for tea could be set up there. Both supported her idea at the same time, but then glared at each other. Ray joined them, apologizing to his lordship for taking so long at the training ground. Yuna congratulated the girl, as that uniform suited her very well. Ray remembered that the lady had asked her for help with something. Suddenly, she saw the Archduke pulling out weeds and was stunned by the sight. Yuna recounted that Tio and Azarim had offered to help her. Ray looked at the foreigner, who was indeed good in combat. She was furious that this guy dared to hurt the castle master and hated conceited people. The dark-haired man stood up instantly upon noticing Ray. He had seen her in the training ground and was pleasantly impressed. The young woman's cheeks immediately flushed from the unexpected compliment from the conceited foreigner. Malin, with a sly smile, asked Ray not to stay paralyzed. She picked up the axe, but Yuna stopped her and reminded her that there were two young men who could take care of it. The protagonist immediately headed towards the men, pointed at the stumps, and asked them to pull them out. It was necessary to clear the area for new plantings, so the men immediately agreed to help with the task. Theo grabbed the axe, but instantly his hand felt a sharp pain. Azarin asked if he was already having difficulties. The Archduke suggested the chestnut-haired man try it himself, and the man replied that he had cut down no less than 100 trees en route. He raised the axe, but felt a sharp pain in his left side. In the end, the axe only grazed the trunk. Ray approached and skeptically told him that she would better do it. With a clear and confident swing, full of strength, the girl split the thick trunk in half with ease. Yuna marveled at Ray's strength. The girl suggested his lordship stop, but Tia decided to take charge himself. He had to surpass the chestnut-haired man at all costs, so the trunk had to split right in front of Yuna. Even so, he managed to split the trunk a little. Theo instantly entered praise-seeking mode, but instead, she approached with concern, noticing his paleness and cold hands. Yuna informed the maids that they would finish later. The protagonist suggested Theo go lie down. A light blush appeared on the Archduke's face. He loved the attention, but she shouldn't worry. Suddenly, Azarin proposed to walk alone with the girl. Theo tried to join, but the heroine insisted he rest. Yuna promised it would be short. Azarin concluded by saying that His Highness needed absolute rest. Theo quickly took her hand. In a pitiful voice, he declared he felt terribly ill. The Archduke asked them to hurry, because he wants Yuna to personally prepare his special herbal tea. The protagonist promised she would be back soon. Then she left for a walk with her friend. Theo immediately called Ray. The Lord ordered them to follow them, because he wanted to know everything they talked about. And the girl wasn't even surprised by that. It's hard to believe Azarim came here for a friendly visit. Therefore, Theo wondered what that chestnut-haired man was plotting. Everything bloomed here despite the cold, and Yuna asked her childhood friend if he didn't find it amazing. But all this was thanks to the magic stones. Yuna said that in winter, even the river water freezes here. Azarim immediately noticed several spies watching them and suspected who was behind it. He apologized for the delay, explaining that he was simply admiring the scenery. Yuna confessed that these nature walks brought her peace. Azarim clearly remembered that since his earliest childhood, when they were small and innocent, Yuna loved walking. Their walks together meant a lot to him, but with the arrival of winter, they had to remain in the past. Azarim kept telling himself that it was the only way to save the island, but still he felt rage. Suddenly, they reached a hunter's cabin. The chestnut-haired man proposed going inside and talking without prying eyes. The protagonist wondered if they hadn't been alone the whole time. Azarim suggested talking in the Rouge language, since no one was nearby, and Yuna happily agreed. The chestnut-haired man told the girl that Zuma was the winner of that tournament. He regretted not being able to attend the tournament celebration in person. Then he started imitating his father, whom he had to help instead of going to the tournament. Yuna asked how her father was doing now. Azarim told her that since she left, he rarely leaves home. The protagonist asked her friend to tell him she was fine when he returned to Rue Island, but Azarim refused, saying she would tell him herself. But Delcan told Yuna that she should wait at least one goal, so it wouldn't look like a trap to obtain magic stones. The chestnut-haired man told her she didn't need to stay there anymore. He found another way. Ulis knocked on the door of his lord's office and announced his arrival. The Archduke, completely bare from the waist up, immediately asked his advisor where Yuna was. Ulis was surprised that the wound had healed so quickly. Theo frowned upon learning that the young woman had returned a long time ago. The advisor confessed that he himself had asked the lady to go later, since he thought his lordship would already be asleep. The Archduke asked if there was any news from the shadows. Ulis recounted that they talked a bit about the news from the island, and then they entered the lord's house cabin. Theo asked furiously what the hell they were doing there. The advisor explained, confused, that they were just cold. In the cabin, they talked at length about something, all in the Rouge language, so the topic is unknown. Shadow said that Azarim was clearly trying to convince the girl of something. The protagonist lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. In her head echoed the voice of her childhood friend, telling her that he found another way to get home. He asked her to remember the snow woman from the island's legends. Her hair was white as snow. There existed a legend. If the snow woman drank water from the river of memories, she would regain her true power and save the island from disaster. On the island, many thought Yuna resembled that woman. However, the heroine remembered that no one knows where that river is. But Azarim managed to find it. The source of blessed water in a specific temple, from the description, looked very much like the river of memories, emitting a blue glow. Yuna asked surprisedly how he had come up with that. He heard it in the conversations of the locals. Although they couldn't fully trust it, the man saw no other way to save the island. And he didn't want Yuna to be belittled. The heroine would like to help her people. That's why she promised to ask Tio to let her go to that temple. A smile immediately bloomed on Azarim's face, and he thanked Yuna for supporting his idea without hesitation. But the man asked her not to tell the foreigner about the legends of Rue. It would be great if Azarim was right. Then the island would be saved from the cold, and everything would be fine. Dad could regain his strength, and the protagonist would live happily with Tio. If there is no deal, they could be a normal couple. The young woman gave herself over to her dreams, but suddenly she remembered the promise to the Archduke, made that morning, and ran towards him. It was late, and Tio might be asleep. But if Yuna gave her word, she had to keep it. The protagonist quickly decided to prepare an aromatic tea and return to her room. Upon opening the door, she bumped right into someone. It turned out to be Theo, who hadn't fallen asleep yet. Yuna didn't expect him to wait so long. She apologized instantly. She lost track of time. She eagerly hoped he wasn't furious at that moment. The protagonists sat facing each other. Theo cursed inwardly, captivated by her beautiful face. He forgot what he was supposed to say. Now Yuna looks like a little bird with fallen wings. Very adorable. The young woman cheered up when he said he was going for a walk just as she entered. After such a long sleep, she felt weak, so she decided to take a turn. Yuna was happy to know that the Lord was well now. Theo asked about the walk, and the protagonist recounted that they returned early, before it got dark. The Lord's jaw tightened when Yuna added that it was great to chat with Azarim after so long. Suddenly, the girl asked if they could visit the northern temple. Azarim replied that he would love to visit. Tio explained that entering the local temple of the goddess would not be easy. Obtaining a permit could take a long time. Yuna was only interested in the Valo temple, so the dark-haired man didn't want to take the risk. The girl suggested waiting. Tio was startled to learn that Azarim planned to set sail right after visiting the temple, but now he would have to delay. In other words, that idiot will leave if Tio shows him the temple. The Lord stood up abruptly and declared confidently that they would go to the temple immediately. Tomorrow morning, Yuna reminded him that he himself had said it would take a long time, but the Archduke promised to break down the door if they couldn't manage it. Now Tio's intentions were serious. With a wide smile, he explained that it was all because Azarim was his esteemed guest. The next day, Tio was impeccable, ready for action. The secretary offered him a tray, asking him to take something for his lordship. To cover himself during prayer, Tio immediately thought it would look great on Yuna's head during prayer, like a robin wrapped in silk. While the Archduke imagined the scene, Azarim knocked on the door. Seeing the Lord's grim look, the chestnut-haired man, dressed in a sacred robe from the Bayon Empire, reminded him that he had knocked. The man explained that he came to see Yuna, so he begged him not to refuse him this time. Tio was forced to agree, but on the condition that he go too. The man approached Yuna's room and knocked on the door. Uly's younger sister appeared at the door, and seeing his lordship, allowed him to enter. Yuna, dressed in a beautiful white and blue sacred robe, was happy to see that Tio and Azarim had come to visit her together. Both men were captivated by the young woman's beauty. The heroine, somewhat embarrassed, admitted it was the first time she had worn the sacred robe, so she felt a little strange. Tio approached from behind, and so she wouldn't freeze on the way to the temple, threw a cloak over her shoulders. Yuna tried to explain that the robe was warm, although thin, thanks to the magic stone dust. But Theo didn't listen to her. Azarim, glancing around, commented that Yuna's room was quite small compared to the Archduke's chambers. She replied that she felt comfortable there, but the chestnut-haired man was more worried about how she was treated in that place. Yuna told him that she had wanted to stay there, and then the hero asked whether she was perhaps afraid to be alone with the Archduke. Because everyone fears him here, even the servants avoid him. The heroine demanded Azarim stop saying such things, since Tio had organized the entire trip just for him. The chestnut-haired man explained he was just expressing the general opinion and apologized if he had offended anyone. Now they should hurry to the temple. After looking at Tio, the young woman apologized for Azarim, but the Archduke told her not to worry. Anyway, her friend will leave soon. Shortly after, our heroes arrived at the temple in Phoenix. Azarim noticed that the temple was quite beautiful, and Yuna happily agreed. But suddenly, the high priest of the temple of the goddess Daphne in Phoenix ran towards them. Lambros, with a hoarse voice, asked his lordship confusedly what brought him to his humble abode. Everyone knows the Lord's contempt for the temple. The Lord asked sternly if they forbade him, but the high priest replied with a trembling voice that it was not so. In that case, Tio asked them to take the Archduchess immediately. Seeing the surprise and confusion on Lambros's face, Tio irritably asked if he had to transfer him to the Eye of Barry Temple. The high priest immediately bowed his head and apologized for his lack of tact before inviting them in. Lambros directed his gaze to the Archduchess. The lady looked simply incredible, as if the goddess Daphne herself had descended from heaven to earth and was in front of them. Tio perfectly knew what the high priest was thinking, so he ordered him not to even open his mouth. Suddenly, the Lord remembered something important. The man placed a snow-white shawl over Yuna's head and explained that local women cover their heads when praying. The girl waved her hand and promised to return soon, and Tio promised to wait for her in that place. As soon as the high priest and the archduchess left, the men were left alone with each other. Tio was the first to break the silence, asking Azorim if the temple had been his objective from the beginning. The chestnut-haired man didn't understand what his lordship was talking about, and then the Archduke told him that he had studied his route from Ru to Phoenix. It turned out that Azorim had been in the Bao Empire for quite some time. It seems Delkin took good care of him, well enough that the chestnut-haired man could afford an expensive robe. Delkin was not surprised by the investigation. However, spying on the Archduke is not enough, because Delkin came to see Yuna. But Tio thought it was just an excellent excuse. The chestnut-haired man replied enigmatically. He knows Yuna well. She wouldn't be happy here. It would be better for her to marry him. Theo sternly stated that he didn't give a damn what Delkin's money Sarim spent it on, and why he exactly came. He just wanted to stop listening to the chestnut-haired man's lamentations about his unrequited love. It's disgusting. Unable to stand it, Azorim shouted that he had also found out something about his lordship. They say the Archduke is a demon. His massacres ravaged countries and left people homeless. Azorim barely asked if his thirst for blood awakened after his mother's death. Tio grabbed him tightly by the neck and lifted him up. Azorim mockingly asked if Yuna knew this side of his lordship. Tio furiously demanded the bastard shut his mouth. Just then, Yuna appeared in the doorway, frightened and witnessing the scene. She didn't understand what was happening there. The young woman ordered Tio to stop immediately and let go of Azorim. The Archduke obeyed, and Yuna ran to her friend, who began to cough heavily, trying to catch his breath. Throughout that time, Theo watched the girl's concern upon seeing Azorim injured, and even with a bruise. Unable to bear the scene any longer, the Lord headed for the exit but had to stop, because Azorim asked if His Excellency was not going to apologize. The chestnut-haired man only cares about Yuna, after all. But the door slammed shut. The Archduke left silently. Azorin wanted to take the girl's hand to suggest they flee far from that tyrant, but Yuna pulled away. She directly asked her friend why he was lying, since she had heard everything. The chestnut-haired man froze. He clearly did not expect this turn of events. He called Yuna as she was heading for the exit, but the girl asked him not to call her that. Azorin has no right. And the protagonist added that even if nothing had happened to the island, she would not have married him anyway. The door slammed shut with a crash, and Azorin cursed under his breath. The temple servants began to worry seeing the tense Archduke walking down the hallway. The man was furious about falling so easily for cheap provocation. Yuna had an expression of total disappointment towards Tio, as if she could never forgive him. Theo furiously punched the wall. Surely now the girl fears him. The man was terrified that Yuna would decide to leave him, although deep down, he knew it was for the best, because sooner or later, Yuna would see his true face. Even if she wants to run away, Theo will not let her go, even if Yuna never smiles again. The door burst open. Yuna appeared in the threshold and indignantly asked Tio what he was doing. Yes, it will be better if he gets angry. That way it will be easy for the Archduke to chain Yuna and not regret it. But contrary to expectations, Yuna took him by the hand and told him he should have given Sarim a good beating. Seeing the Archduke's injured hand, the young woman worried and suggested going to the doctor immediately. Theo replied that it wasn't necessary, but Yuna interpreted it as if the Lord feared doctors. The girl confessed that she also feared them before, but if the man wanted to recover quickly, he had to be brave. Yuna's hand was very warm. Tio said he could simply resort to a priest. It would be faster than going to the doctor. The young woman rejoiced and suggested going there as soon as possible. Seeing Yuna's smile, a slight blush appeared on the Archduke's face, and he also smiled, letting himself be dragged by the girl. The priest shuddered when the door burst open, and his lordship appeared in the threshold with the Archduchess. Tio stated that he would be grateful if they were left alone for a minute. The temple server was stunned by such a request, so the Archduke was forced to repeat, more severely, for him to disappear. The priest ran out of the room, and Yuna, surprised, asked Tio why he had kicked him out. The man reassured the young woman and explained that it was not the priest who healed, but the medicine. Yuna offered Tio a seat, since before applying the medicine, all the blood had to be cleaned thoroughly. Although the Archduke will have to endure a bit, the wound is deeper than it looks. Teo's face completely flushed when Yuna approached his hand and began to blow on it. The man turned sharply, but the protagonist interpreted this as Teo lying that it didn't hurt. He replied that it wasn't so, and explained that Yuna just had to put a few drops on the wound. Thanks to the man's explanations, Yuna did everything correctly. The wound healed immediately in an amazing way, as that medicine contains traces of divine power. Now that Teo's wound was healed, the man asked Yuna to give him her hand. She also got a little dirty because of him. With all tenderness and care, the young man began to clean Yuna's hand with a cloth, while a sweet smile illuminated his face. The protagonist confessed that she had actually heard the entire conversation because she left the prayer hall to get a guide. She felt bad that Azarim was so rude to the Archduke, but Teo replied that she shouldn't worry about it. What happened can simply be considered a mistake. On the contrary, Teo himself should offer his apologies. The young woman burst out laughing and asked what Teo meant at that moment. The Archduke was just about to explain everything when suddenly the door burst open, and Azarim appeared in the threshold. It didn't matter what happened, but the chestnut-haired man didn't understand how Yuna could leave so easily. Azarim flinched as soon as the young woman demanded he apologize first. The chestnut-haired man apologized to Yuna. He suggested ending it there and leaving, but she said she didn't need his apologies. Now Azarim had to apologize properly to her husband. Teo's heart beat furiously. Everything inside him rejoiced. She had called him her husband. Reluctantly, the chestnut-haired man bowed his head and apologized to the Archduke, admitting he had gone too far. Unable to contain his smile after Yuna's words, Teo accepted the apologies. Azarim thanked him for the mercy, but the Archduke didn't care. Yuna had called him husband. Just then, voices were heard behind the door. The door burst open, and Ulis appeared in the threshold, whom the high priest was trying to restrain with all his might. Teo, perplexed, asked what was happening. Apparently, according to the priests, the temple's holy water spring had instantly dried up. There are 5 Daphne temples on the entire continent. Each region has its own architecture and characteristics, but they all share something. They receive holy water from the main temple, with a constant and inexhaustible temperature. Its magical properties prove that the goddess Daphne still protects her world. About 3 months ago, the holy water began to diminish until it dried up completely. If people knew, they would believe Daphne had abandoned the north, so they replaced it with normal water. But unlike the real one, its quantity constantly decreased. That's why the priests restricted access to the temple. Theo remembered that Yuna arrived in Phoenix 3 months ago. Lambros promised that they would recover the holy water. They already sent a priest to the Eye of the Storm. They just have to wait for him. The Lord asked about the other temples, and the high priest replied that his temple is independent of the Bayo Empire and does not communicate with others. If the same problem occurs in other temples, the empire will act quickly to obtain the saint's power. Teo knelt before Lambros and stated that he must know the contents of the sacred texts. The cleric nodded, and then the Archduke asked if he didn't think the Archduchess could be a saint. It seemed to Teo that the high priest had already noticed the similarity. A saint, she is the messenger of the goddess herself, her personification. But since the goddess Daphne has already stepped foot in their world, a saint simply cannot exist. After hearing Lambros's words, Teo told him he would let what happened pass, but on one condition. If any of the temples contact them, he must inform him immediately. Back in the Northern Archduke's palace, the heroes sat down to eat. There was no holy water, so the temple visit served absolutely no purpose. Azarim couldn't even hear what the Northern Archduke was discussing with the high priest. But there was something even worse. Apparently, Yuna has no intention of leaving this place. The young woman was excited to see that the wound on Teo's hand had completely healed. The Lord replied that the temple medicines are very effective, and at that moment, Azarim said he wanted to know why the holy water disappeared. Finally, the chestnut-haired man showed some manners. Teo recounted that, according to the priests, there was a problem with the storage method, and that they would soon replenish the supply of holy water in about 3 months. However, all of this was very strange. Azarim said he just wanted to see the temple, but something related to the holy water interested the man greatly. The chestnut-haired man explained that he had simply heard about its health benefits. That's why he got curious. In any case, he is leaving tomorrow. Theo ironically said he was very sorry because he hadn't been able to properly enjoy the company of his dear guest. Azarim mentally tried to muster patience so as not to respond with a biting remark. The chestnut-haired man told Yuna, with a smile, that he was very sorry for bothering her, and couldn't help it all. The champagne cork shot out with a characteristic sound, rising up and leaving behind a faint trail of bubbles. Theo was incredibly happy that the idiot was finally leaving. Now no one could compete for Yuna's attention, except him. The secretary entered the room and apologized to his master for the sudden interruption. He saw the bottle and reminded his master that he didn't like champagne, as the drink was too light. Theo accepted, but added that it was perfect for celebrating, and Yuli's understood everything instantly. The secretary apologized for interrupting the celebration, but an urgent matter arose that required attention. He extended an envelope towards his master and asked him to review it. It was about the Magic Stone Festival in the south. Apparently, they found a new vein in the south, and the locals are holding a festival in gratitude to the goddess Daphne. It is imperative that the Archduke visits. Circumstances arose that require a trip to the south, to Servan. They managed to find the priest with whom Delcon met, and even establish secret contact with him. They could talk in Servan. Tio assumed this had to do with the holy water. The Empire watches the Archduke's actions, so the festival is the perfect pretext to go south. Thea remembered that Camilla would be in that place. At their last meeting, the Archduke even received a good slap, but now she hardly goes out. That didn't matter at all. Theo asked his secretary to prepare everything for the trip. The next day, Yuna came out to see her friend off. It would have been great if Azarin stayed longer, but the man had already been away from home for too long. Before, the hero thought the north was an icy desert, but it turns out the food is decent and the bed soft. Now it was really time to say goodbye for good. But suddenly, Azarin noticed that Yuna was holding something in her hands. It was a small stack of letters. The young woman asked her friend to deliver them to her father. As soon as he returned home, Yuna had been writing him a letter every day since she arrived here. As Azarin imagined, Yuna misses Ruja. At that moment, the Northern Archduke appeared on the street. The man said he had prepared a few magic gems as a gift. There were quite a few, but he organized everything. Reluctantly, Azarin thanked him for the present. Immediately after, the chestnut-haired man approached the young woman. He hugged her tightly, which caused an immediate reaction in Tio, and thanked Yuna for such a warm welcome. Azarin hoped they could see each other again soon. The protagonist admitted that she wished so too. Then, the chestnut-haired man got into the carriage and left. The first thing Azarin will do is go to Bayo. He needs to find the man who leaked the information about the holy water. Touching the girl's letters, the man apologized to Yuna. He will deliver them someday, but not now. Sitting at the table, drinking tea, Yuna sighed heavily. The Northern Archduke noticed it immediately. And worried, he asked the young woman what was wrong. But he better hadn't asked. As it turns out, Yuna was worried about having been too cold to Azarim. Theo began to doubt the wisdom of his choice when he decided not to get rid of that bastard completely. The man ordered that they could come in. The secretary immediately opened the door, and the chef appeared in the threshold, apologizing to the aristocrats for interrupting their conversation. Yuna's face lit up with joy as soon as she saw the dessert. Just by looking at it, she already felt the desire to eat it all down to the last crumb. This dessert contained chestnuts. On the chef's recommendation, Theo specially ordered this dish. Without losing a second, the girl hurried to try the dish. The bite was so soft that it simply melted in her mouth, creating an unforgettable sensation of pleasure. Yuna immediately exclaimed that his lordship's chef was a true master of his craft. Theo smiled, while thinking he would definitely have to give him a raise. Setting down the cup on the table, the Northern Archduke informed Yuna that in a few days he would leave for the south. A very important matter had arisen, so the man would most likely have to be absent for at least 2 weeks. Tio asked if she could manage without him, secretly hoping Yuna would ask to accompany him. But the girl was only convinced, once again, that the Archduke was a very important person, so she should not prevent him from fulfilling his duties. Yuna confidently exclaimed that if Ray and Malin helped her, she wouldn't care about anything else. There was definitely no need to worry about her. The protagonist wished the man a good trip. When he expected anything but that, David noticed that the Archduke's wound had completely healed. Not even a scar remained. The help worked wonderfully. Now, the physiotherapist was curious. Did his lordship have any other complaints about his health? Tio dropped the bomb. Now he had a squirrel as a pet. The last time it was a bird. And now a snow squirrel appears. So cute and adorable that it's impossible to stop looking at her. But the man was really worried that it might run away. If it were up to him, the Archduke would lock her in a cage and not let anyone near her. This way, he would avoid her escape. David, somewhat perplexed, asked his lordship if in reality the squirrel wanted to escape. Perhaps, in some way, it is showing that it is not well or has already tried to run away. But none of that has happened. In that case, no need to jump to conclusions. Perhaps simply, the squirrel is happy with the Archduke. The master had not felt joy for so long that now, he seeks to protect his new happiness at all costs. Therefore, he is consumed by anxiety that everything might vanish. The only way out of this situation might be to make the squirrel understand who is in charge here. First, a psychological bond must be created. Try to flatter the squirrel. Feed it by hand, stroke its head. David still doesn't realize that this has nothing to do with a squirrel. Meanwhile, the physiotherapist continued. In a while, the squirrel will start seeing the Archduke as its master and will follow him everywhere. Then there will be nothing to worry about. Tio wrote down every word the doctor said. It seems His Highness is finally learning to recognize emotions. He just needs to understand how to control them, and then Tio will be able to fully regain his humanity. While getting ready for bed, Yuna hummed a simple melody. Malin asked her mistress if something good had happened today. Yuna nodded and recounted that His Highness had showered her with compliments all day. He even said she ate bread very well. The man was pleased to see that the girl was eating properly. Only now did Tio notice Yuna's big, round eyes, which looked so beautiful. And when the protagonists went for an evening walk, the hydrangeas still blooming caught Yuna's attention. These flowers wilt quite quickly, so Yuna was glad she could admire their bloom at that moment. Theo noticed that Yuna was very smart. Not everyone knows so much about botany, so the Archduke suggested walking a little further. Yuna accepted this proposition with enthusiasm, and then they returned to the mansion and ate a chestnut cake together. And while Yuna ate, the master praised her incessantly. Malin found it hard to imagine that the master could shower someone with so many compliments, but that meant his lordship liked her very much. Now the Archduke has changed so much thanks to his lordship. Before, he barely left his office, not to mention walks. Also, his lordship drank every day. In short, what they say is true, that marriage makes a man a person. Yuna realized that she wanted to do more babysitting. After all, he is her husband. The protagonist turned to Malin, saying that while his lordship is traveling, she would like to do something. To start with, the gardens need to be weeded. But that's not all, not by a long shot. The young woman was interrupted by the maids, who were fondling a furry creature. Yuna approached the maids to find out what had them so occupied. The girls immediately got excited and greeted her ladyship. One of the maids explained that it was an orphaned kitten that they sometimes came by to play with. They had no intention of keeping it. The maids did not expect their mistress to ask permission to play with that little thing too. Enormous enthusiasm and tenderness were reflected in Yuna's eyes. Of course, the maids did not object, so they gathered around the kitten and started playing with it. The little one was very playful and fun. But it was lunchtime. The kitten had to eat. The little one devoured the food brought by the castle maids with great pleasure. The kitten ate so adorably that it was impossible to look away from that scene. The intonation of the maids began to remind the protagonist of something very intensely. A question immediately arose in her head. Whose voice had she heard before? Before getting into the carriage and leaving, the Northern Archduke decided to take one last look at his castle before the trip. Yulis informed the master that it was time to get up, but Tia waited to see the girl before leaving. Even if just for an instant, he was about to board when, suddenly, he heard a familiar voice. The flustered Yuna hastily came out of the majestic castle and begged his lordship to wait a little. Stopping in front of the man, the protagonist indignantly asked if he really intended to leave without even saying goodbye. Completely unexpectedly, Yuna declared that she couldn't pat Tio's head or call him sweetheart. The Archduke is too tall and not at all tender. Handsome suits him much better. Instead, the protagonist hugged him tightly. Yuna asked his lordship to return safe and sound because she planned to wait for him. The Northern Archduke promised to return unharmed. Touching the young woman's earring, he offered to bring her anything, whatever it might be. Yuna moved away a little and, embarrassed, told him that it must be hot in the south, so she asked him to bring her a few hardy flowers. She wanted to plant them in the garden. Theo promised to bring them without fail. While he is away, the Archduke authorized Yuna to spend whatever she needs and begged her not to leave. The girl got distracted and replied that she planned to stay in the mansion anyway. But Theo was very worried. He revealed secrets and implored Yuna to call the Shadow Knights if necessary. She nodded, but already understood that the master had to leave and could not delay any longer. Theo wrapped his arm around the young woman's waist and begged her to stay like that a little longer. He desperately wished to spend one more moment by her side. The protagonist closed her eyes, melting into the man's strong embrace. There was no time to waste, so the Archduke got into the carriage and set off on his journey. He had barely moved a few meters from the castle and already longed to return home. 3 days later, Yuna, with a small shovel in hand, asked Ray if it hadn't turned out great. The garden, once desolate, had transformed into a beautiful place thanks to the Archduchess, who decorated it for the Grand Duke. Ray assured her that his lordship would love it, when suddenly, Malin came running up. In a panic, running at full speed, Yuli's younger sister was already breathless. Then, Malin proudly announced that the lady had received an invitation for tea from the influential Brown family. Receiving such an invitation means that, now, Lady Yuna can attend any social event. But Malin was a little indignant because the invitation should have arrived much sooner. Information is exchanged at social events, so the lady will be able to find out more about the Duke. If that can help Theo, the protagonist was willing to go. Therefore, Yuna confidently declared that she would definitely attend the gathering. Now the three of them will have to go together, so they must go buy dresses and prepare gifts. It was late at night on the street. The 24-hour tavern no longer had customers, and the employees were starting to fall asleep. The bartender opened one eye slightly upon hearing the sound of the door opening. A gentleman appeared in the threshold, ordering them to serve him all the food they had in the tavern. The man with the mustache asked them to wait a minute, that he would bring everything right away. Theo understood that from the outside it might seem like they had been hungry for days, but he insisted on crossing the mountains. The knights who were on horseback were exhausted, so now they could rest. And at dawn they would set off again. The Archduke himself refused dinner and went straight to his room. It was strange for the secretary. He couldn't believe his lordship was so tired. Theo hastily took off his extra clothes. Before leaving, he left a message for Ray, so Yuna should have already checked the communication stone. The man sat on the bed and cleared his throat. Then he asked the green orb, addressing Yuna if she could hear him. The communication stone lit up, and a soft, familiar voice came out, asking how to use this. Yuna didn't know if it worked, so the Archduke called her by name. The young woman got excited. It seemed like the man was close and talking to her. Theo explained that it was a communication stone, made of a special magic stone. Yuna asked if that wasn't very expensive, and the Archduke lied, saying not much. Deciding to change the subject, Theo asked what she had been doing during the day. The protagonist happily recounted that she had received an invitation to tea from Count Brown's family. The Archduke knew that this family traded magic stones with the Bayo Empire. They would never oppose him. Yuna said she planned to bake chestnut cakes and give them to the lady. The man was sure, if the girl cooked, the culinary creations would be amazing. The protagonist thanked Theo and decided to also ask what he had been doing today. She found out that the Northern Archduke had gone riding today and had only recently arrived at the inn to rest. It wasn't difficult to cross the mountains, and Yuna already imagined how impressive the landscape there would be. The man replied strangely that probably yes, and Yuna assumed he was very tired. So she asked the Archduke to rest well and quickly disconnected, making Theo exclaim perplexed. He begged the girl to wait, as he still wanted to talk to her about many things. No matter how tired his lordship was, Yulis believed his master should eat, so he brought him food himself. As he approached the door, he suddenly heard his master's voice. The secretary didn't understand what was happening, since his lordship should have been alone in the room at that moment. Suddenly, the master asked a girl what she was wearing at that moment. Yulis already thought he had misheard, because Master Theo would never say anything like that. But suddenly, his lordship announced that he was naked. The image of the half-naked master invaded Yulis's mind, and the secretary wondered what the hell he was doing. Yuna froze, and her cheeks flushed upon hearing that Theo was naked. The man rushed to clear up the misunderstanding, explaining that he had only undressed a little because of the heat. It was much hotter here than in the north. But the truth is that Theo was wearing fine clothes, and in the moonlight, his muscles looked very good. Of course, Yuna was not secretly spying on his body. The thoughts that the protagonist usually kept to herself slipped out unintentionally. Yuna unintentionally blurted out that, since the attic is very warm, she sometimes takes off her pajamas when she sleeps. Theo blushed upon learning that his wife sleeps naked, and imagined that scene. The pillow feathers flew out instantly in all directions. Hearing a strange noise, Yuna worriedly asked what had happened there. After making a hole in the pillow, Theo replied that nothing important had happened. Just then, the secretary entered the room and asked his lordship what he was doing. From the voice, Yuna immediately knew it was Yuli's. Theo quickly told the girl that it was very noisy here, so she could rest, and he would contact her later. Only now did Yuli's realize that his master had been holding the communication stone the whole time. But the absurd thing is that it is a very valuable artifact, and the Archduke uses it to talk to the lady. What if a war starts and these objects become scarce? Something so expensive is only afforded by royalty or high nobility, and the Archduke uses it for nonsense. Yuli's took the artifact, ignoring that Theo carried 3 linking stones just in case. But what angered the secretary the most was that his master didn't even listen to him. The next morning, in the dining room of the Northern Archduke's castle, Chef Hans informed the lady that her dish was ready, and Ray warned her not to burn herself. With utmost caution, Yuna's personal maid took her creations out of the oven. Ray's small cakes had a perfect flaky crust. Her ladyship's cake was also excellent, so Hans suggested everyone try a piece. Yuna suggested inviting the rest of the servants to the tasting. The protagonist was guided by the need for an objective opinion. Everyone loved the idea, so Malin announced that she would call them immediately. A little later, Yuna thanked everyone for gathering there. She proposed that everyone try the chestnut cake and give their honest opinion. The protagonist didn't want to be left behind, so she also decided to try a piece of her creation. Against all odds, the cake turned out to be quite salty, but the other maids even liked it. The taste was quite good, and the crunchy crust gave it its charm. The protagonist did not expect to hear such an opinion. They probably don't know what a chestnut cake tastes like, since they are trying it for the first time. Desserts are quite expensive. Can't servants afford something like that? The protagonist apologized to Hans and asked if he could make a chestnut cake for everyone. The chef replied that it would be difficult, but completely possible. From now on, if any servant wants dessert, Yuna asked Hans to cook in abundance, and not to worry about the price. His Highness the Archduke himself said she could spend money freely, so now Yuna takes advantage of this opportunity. The surprised maids told their mistress that she was not obliged to do that for them. However, the protagonist was firmly convinced everyone works hard on the estate. Therefore, everyone here could eat in abundance, and Yuna eagerly awaited their teamwork. The maids immediately began to offer their help in the garden. Thus, without realizing it, the tea day arrived at Count Brown's estate. Finally, the preparations were completed. Everything looked perfect. Emily Brown, the mistress of Count Brown's mansion, was sure that the Grand Duchess would find no fault. Finally, she could see with her own eyes what kind of person His Highness was. They say that girl has hair as white as snow. But who in the north could love snow? Emily was clear. Today she would show the Duchess her place. This was revenge for Giselle. The woman remembered how her dear friend sobbed in front of her in the past. Unable to tell what happened, today Giselle's husband went hunting, and because of the Grand Duchess, His Highness got angry with him. Her husband only said a couple of words, and because of that, His Highness the Grand Duke grabbed him by the neck and threw him to the floor. What happened deeply outraged Emily. Moreover, all of Giselle's family's magic stones were confiscated, the family ruined. All because of His Highness. Emily Brown could not forget how desperate her friend was at that moment. So now the mistress of the Brown house was going to get revenge. The ladies began to arrive and immediately noticed how beautifully the garden was decorated. Her mere presence will terrify the Grand Duchess, who is nothing more than a savage. The maid informed Madame that Her Highness, the Grand Duchess, had arrived. Yuna approached the table and with a warm smile told Madame she was happy to meet her. All the ladies opened their mouths at the same time, surprised. They were in shock upon discovering that this was the famous Grand Duchess. They said she had hair as white as snow, but the girl was much more beautiful than anyone imagined. If the ladies remain seated without greeting the lady, the Archduchess will notice their hostility. But suddenly, Yuna extended her hand towards Emily. The protagonist smiled broadly and was the first to introduce herself. Emily extended her hand and looked with bewilderment at Her Highness, the Northern Archduchess. Yuna shook the lady's hand vigorously and thanked her for the invitation. The woman offered her a seat. She had specially prepared a place for her at the end of the table. As Emily expected, the great lady's pride was hurt by having a seat at the end. Yuna apologized to the lady and said she only had one small request. The heroine came with 2 companions, so she asked the owner of Count Brown's mansion to add more chairs. Emily wondered if the Archduchess wanted more maids to join her tea time. The lady knew Secretary Ulysses's younger sister, but the short-haired maid was completely unknown to her. The protagonist, calmly and with a smile, explained that she was her maid, named Ray. The maid called her mistress and assured her that everything would be fine, although they needed to bring more gifts. Yuna asked to be notified immediately if she got tired, so they could switch places. The Archduchess is going to give up her seat to the maid. Apparently, she is implying that she doesn't like Emily's tea at all. One must be very alert with this woman. The tea began. Madame Brown thanked everyone for accepting her invitation. She especially thanked her ladyship, who is making her debut in high society today. To the blue-haired lady, it seemed strange that her ladyship hadn't received invitations to social events before. Now people might think that the Grand Duchess only gets along with noble ladies of the duchy. Indignation appeared on Malin's face, as these women are guilty of not sending invitations. Yuna agreed with the lady. Madame Emily was the first to send her an invitation. That's why she is very excited today. The Archduchess was visiting someone else's house for the first time. She felt like a guest in a friend's house. How great! The word friend sounded good to Madame Brown. With a cunning smile, Emily asked if she could call Her Highness by her name. As friends do, the protagonist thought it was a wonderful idea. That is how true friends act. Now Yuna wanted to know the names of the others. The ladies were stunned by the Grand Duchess's unexpected request. The blue-haired aristocrat decided to introduce herself first and revealed her name was Teresa Smith. The green-haired lady introduced herself as Chloe, and the light-haired girl with a cherry-colored bow on her head said her name was Marie. The protagonist was happy to meet them all, so she also said her name. Emily understood that, at this rate, she would lose control of the situation, so she would have to use that plan. The woman suggested having tea before it got cold. Teresa Smith slowly reached out her hand towards the teacup that was between her and the Grand Duchess. But just then, the cup wobbled. Before the contents spilled onto Yuna's dress, Ray managed to catch the cup, and thus a disaster was avoided. The maid asked her mistress to be more careful in the future. Teresa was embarrassed and thanked the maid. Ray addressed Her Highness and informed her that she would immediately go get the prepared gifts. And Yuna nodded. Since this girl is only called Ray, Marie assumed she had no surname. The Archduchess revealed that Ray is not a mere maid, but an actual knight. All the ladies at the table were dumbfounded by such a declaration. Yuna revealed that Ray fought in the war side by side with His Excellency, the Grand Duke. She even received a knight's title. Chloe asked, perplexed, why then is this girl working as a maid? A knight is almost a minor noble. Malin proudly replied that Ray herself wanted it that way. She loves her current job. Emily Brown thought she was a common maid. Now the idea of inviting the girl to sit down was running through her mind. Soon, Ray returned with the gifts. Although modest, Yuna prepared a gift for each of the ladies. She herself baked these chestnut cakes. They looked impeccable. These delicacies were irresistible. Chloe asked, amazed, if the lady made them herself, and Yuna nodded. With her reckless words, the Grand Duchess opened the door for mockery. Now Emily Brown could take advantage of the opportunity. If young Yuna made this cake, the lady was eager to try it. The other ladies also decided they urgently needed to try these creations. Emily Brown popped a piece into her mouth, not expecting this dessert to be delicious. The cake is quite dry, and the chestnuts have too strong a flavor. Although the dessert is fine, the woman remembered she had to find flaws, not to praise the grand lady's creation. The protagonist asked her new friends what they thought of the dessert. The young women replied that they found it quite hard to swallow a piece. You can tell the Grand Duchess made an effort, but the dessert is very dry and the spices are strong. When Malin tried it, the taste was perfect. Perhaps they got spoiled on the way, so she decided to try. Then she realized that the dessert was in perfect condition. Madame Brown boasted that at her wedding, they served the most delicious cake she had ever tasted. The ladies remembered it, as that cake was made by a pastry chef from the Bao Empire. The cream was unique. Suddenly, they asked Yuna what cake there was at her wedding. The ladies laughed softly, casually recalling that the Grand Duchess did not have a wedding ceremony. Madame Brown became curious to know why the ceremony was not held. The protagonist shuddered. They had cornered her with that question. Malin abruptly stood up and indignantly asked Madame Brown to stop and not ask such questions. But Emily was only curious, as there is no special reason why the wedding shouldn't have been held. Unless His Highness, the Grand Duke of the North, said he didn't want to hold it. Yuna shuddered, because Madame hit the nail on the head. From the Archduchess's reaction, Madame Brown knew her assumption was correct. Their marriage was loveless, and yet her husband organized a magnificent ceremony for her. Teresa and Chloe are in a similar situation, and Marie received a ring so heavy she can barely lift her finger. To be unloved by your own husband must be something truly sad. Maylene abruptly stood up and indignantly asked the hostess, Brown, if she hadn't gone too far. The maid wanted to continue, but the protagonist asked her to stop. Emily was right. Yuna failed to celebrate her wedding with His Excellency the Grand Duke, as she married without seeing his face. But precisely because it is a loveless marriage, the protagonist longed for love even more. That's why she asked Emily how she could win her husband's heart. Madame Brown was astonished by such a question. Yuna recounted that she wants to get closer to His Excellency, but even holding hands is a challenge. One fine day, they decided to venture out to the market together. The protagonist narrated this story, and in the end, revealed that she mustered the courage to take his hand. The ladies listened to her story with an almost palpable interest. His Excellency, at that moment, said he would like to go there again, suggesting that the contact was not unpleasant to him. Madame Brown clenched her fists and, with palpable tension, asked Yuna what she meant. The fact that ice flow of a Grand Duke didn't clearly object indicates that he was delighted. Without a doubt, Emily was completely sure of this. Not a doubt assailed her. The protagonist recalled that, recently, they even hugged. Teresa, with a smile, announced that they were advancing much faster than she imagined. Yuna said it was her idea too, but she immediately doubted and couldn't say for sure anymore. If the Archduchess didn't know, she could simply give her opinion about her new friends. The protagonist recounted that she accompanied his lordship and was the first to hug him. But then he said he wanted to stay like that a little longer. The girls started to soften after hearing that. Only now did Madame Brown realize that she was reacting incorrectly. Emily became so excited by the Grand Duchess's story that she completely forgot about the revenge for Giselle. But perhaps Yuna had no bad intentions from the start. The mistress of the Brown house looked at her ladyship, who was smiling while answering another question from Teresa. It's hard to believe that someone so pure and innocent is capable of something bad. Honestly, Giselle's husband is probably the culprit. He has absolutely no manners. And what's more, it's her first relaxed chat over tea. Usually everyone brags. The protagonist turned when Ray called her. For some reason, the girl was holding 4 boxes. Ray explained that they were gifts for the lady of His Highness, the Northern Grand Duke. Inside were Armand's famous dishes, the work of a renowned master. It is a limited edition. No more than 50 are produced per year. The previous night, the Northern Grand Duke ordered Ray to prepare the gifts. But he almost forgot. Malin couldn't understand how Ray could forget an order from His Highness. Then, Yuli's sister understood. If Ray had brought them with the cake, the dessert would have gone unnoticed. Theo must have gotten tired traveling all the way south, but he still prepared the gifts. Suddenly, Emily stood up and asked Her Highness, the Grand Duchess, if she could ask her for advice. Her husband never cared about her during social events. The protagonist was surprised when the lady unexpectedly apologized for her previous rudeness. The lady's cake was simply magnificent, and all the other ladies agreed. The other ladies also regretted it, but Yuna hurried to reply that she simply had a wonderful time. But now the ladies talked to her as if they had never met before. The protagonist greatly enjoyed today and did not hesitate to recount it. All the assembled ladies listened to her story sincerely. Then Yuna approached Emily and with a smile asked if they were friends now. The hostess of the Brown house took the young woman's hand and thanked her for allowing her to be her friend. Yuna proposed that the next gathering be held at her mansion, and Emily replied that she would attend such an event with great joy. The other ladies came closer and also announced that they would gladly attend the Grand Duchess's tea time. It was a gathering where Yuna opened her heart sincerely, and for some reason, now she felt much lighter. The maids informed their mistress that today she had resolved all matters with great wisdom. Apparently, the ladies were delighted with her beauty. Yuna thought that these aristocrats were the first to treat her kindly, but Malin exclaimed that she could barely contain herself at their impudence. Of course, the conversation about the wedding affected the protagonist a bit. but she is glad that they opened their hearts to her sincerity. The Northern Archduchess asked Malin and Ray what they needed to do to organize the tea time at the mansion. Count Woodlick heard that His Highness, the Grand Duke, had visited the festival for the first time. Tio replied nothing, only looked at the man indifferently. Count Woodlick shuddered in fear when the Grand Duke suddenly addressed him. Tio sternly reminded him that he had already asked to be brief and get to the point. The Count humbly begged his lordship to invest in his new business, but the Archduke didn't even want to keep listening. He left the rest to Yuli's and left the room. Woodlick exclaimed, "Aren't you interested in the details, sir?" But the Archduke only harshly asked if his words had not been heard. Now Theo was incredibly busy, so he suggested to the Count that they discuss everything with his secretary. Yuli suggested moving on to discussing investments. Theo hurriedly returned and immediately took out the communication stone to finally talk to Yuna. As soon as the girl answered, the man immediately asked if the afternoon tea went well. The protagonist recounted that she liked it very much. Everyone had been kind and sweet to her. Thea replied to Yuna that everything was because she was the sweetest and most adorable girl in the world. One of a kind, but the protagonist thought it was thanks to Theo, although she was curious to know when he prepared the gifts. The Archduke simply replied that the idea had suddenly occurred to him. In reality, when Yuna said she was going to the tea party, His Excellency sent a messenger instantly. It seems Ray did a good job, because it was obvious those aristocrats were plotting something dark. The young woman confessed that next time, she wanted to host a tea party at her mansion and invite the ladies. Judging by how happy Yuna is, everything went wonderfully. Tio told her that her idea was fantastic. Suddenly, the protagonist reacted and told the Archduke that she had something important to confess. In reality, she spent a lot of money, and Tio wondered, with growing interest, how big was that amount? The protagonist paused to think and tried to calculate the expenses. She hired 2 kitchen assistants for hands and asked them to prepare more desserts for the staff. Yuna did great. Thea replied that she could spend whatever she wanted. They had plenty of money. Everything that belongs to him also belongs to the Grand Duchess. Normally, the protagonists chatted in the room while having a cup of tea. Suddenly, the beautiful young woman became overwhelmingly curious about what face Tio was making. The man froze as soon as Yuna timidly admitted that she missed him. The man's heart began to beat faster, and his cheeks flushed after those words. Yuna reacted quickly. Tio left for work, and here she was whining and saying she missed him. The protagonist started turning her head left and right, trying to push those thoughts out of her head, but she accidentally dropped a stone. And bang! It fell to the floor and shattered. Yuna was devastated. She was just about to use that artifact. Suddenly, a sphere on the shelf glowed, and a familiar voice resonated. The protagonist immediately apologized to Theo for cutting the call short like that. Unexpectedly, the man replied that he missed her very much too. A slight smile instantly appeared on Yuna's lips. She exclaimed again, full of joy, that she missed him terribly too. The next morning, the secretary shouted, "Who thought of building a temple there?" Apparently, the Archduke was overflowing with energy. He even trained last night. Tio explained that he felt he would go crazy and return to the mansion if he didn't let off steam. Yuli's was stunned by those words, but couldn't say anything, as they were almost at the temple. He should already be waiting inside. The secretary knocked on the door and informed the high priest Perkos that he had visitors. The man opened the door and asked both guests to come in. He was waiting for them. From the outside, everything looks very different from how it is inside. The high priest of the Eye of the Storm, Perkos, said that statement was true for most things. He served hazelnut tea, which had amazing properties, warming the body and relieving fatigue. Tio noticed that its taste was the same as Yaz's tea. The high priest perfectly understood that heroes must have a reason to come to him. This man transmitted information about Holy Daphne, so the Northern Grand Duke didn't know if he could trust him. He asked Perkos if he came because of the disappearance of the temple's holy water, and received an immediate affirmative answer. Now it was clear, if the holy water dries up, it means the goddess Daphne is weakening. Possibly, this was related to the appearance of the saint. The high priest replied that he was not sure, as everything depends on the will of the goddess Daphne. Although everyone called Perkos the oldest priest of Daphne's temple, he was actually only 25 years old. Tio and Yuli's could not hide the surprise on their faces. The high priest said that in the Eye of the Storm time flows differently. When he left that place, he left behind all memories of that sight. The Grand Duke ironically asked if he should believe it, as it sounded like complete nonsense. And absurd. Believing it or not is his business, but that means the high priest is not omniscient. If the saint uses her power to restore the holy water, will that power disappear? Perkos could not assure it, but he dared to suppose that the saint herself might disappear too. After the first appearance of the goddess Daphne, the saint vanished. Therefore, if another saint has appeared now, she will most likely fade away after fulfilling her mission. However, these are only Perkos's conjectures. The sacred texts say nothing about the saint's fate, but the words about the disappearance deeply affected the Archduke. If Yuna used her power to restore the holy water and became a normal person again, everything would be fine. Theo thought they could then escape the Bao Empire. At the thought of Yuna disappearing, the Archduke clenched his fists involuntarily. The high priest informed his lordship that that was all his goodwill could offer. Perkos was direct. He doesn't trust the Lord. The priest is indebted to Lady Camilla for her kindness. That is why he favored her grandson. Only now did Tia learn that his grandmother is friends with Perkos. In the past, he owed her a lot. His lordship surely already knew, but many constantly ask the high priest about the saint. Perkos always gave the same answer. The saint's power is not something that should be in the hands of the people. This is not a warning. It is a threat. It can be assumed that Perkos actually thinks the Grand Duke is seeking the saint's power. But now Tio only thought that the high priest owed a favor to Lady Camilla. The Archduke ordered his secretary to contact her immediately and let her know that her grandson will visit as soon as he can. Camilla asked the butler when he will arrive. The man replied soon, and the woman commented that the last time she saw her grandson was about 5 years ago. That sneak is still as stubborn as ever. 5 years ago, Camilla burst into the room after learning about her grandson. He was sitting, his shoulder bandaged and bloody, gritting his teeth from the excruciating pain. Tio lost his arm due to torture, but the priests have just reattached it, so he needs rest. Camilla was indignant when her grandson replied that he was fine and had to return immediately. Tio believed he could not abandon the fight. Now that those bastards had their guard down, he had to attack. The lady's hand rose involuntarily. She gave her grandson a resounding slap and shouted. Had he gone mad and become the monster everyone talks about? Camilla didn't understand what ran in the veins of the imperial family. First her son and now her grandson. Now, the lady understood that she had been very harsh at that moment. This affected not only Theo, but also her own son. A few years ago, Camilla discovered that her son wanted to marry Grand Duchess Karen Rose. The members of the imperial family are full of ambition, and according to Camilla, this marriage will only complicate things for her son. Besides, he is already too vulnerable. What will he do when he goes north and gets sick? However, the blonde man didn't care that Karen Rose was a member of the imperial family. It wasn't for success or glory. The hero simply loved that girl, and only that mattered. Be that as it may, Camilla was strongly opposed. If her son is so desperate to leave, then let him go. She, for her part, will simply live as if she never had a son. 10 years later, the lady received a letter from the north. Camilla learned terrible news from it. Her hands were trembling as she read the letter. Emotions on the verge of explosion. The butler offered to prepare the carriage, but the lady refused. She no longer considered him her son. If Camilla had gotten along with Karen Rose, Uncle would have chosen another path. Not war. The butler entered and announced that his lordship's carriage had arrived. Soon, Tio entered with a noble bearing. Hugging a cup of tea, the woman asked her only grandson what brought him there. Camilla joked. If Tio came to see her first, he had already seen everything in life. The Archduke announced that he came to propose a deal. But first, he asked Camilla to state her conditions. A magic stone or whatever, it didn't matter. Theo, instead, wished for his grandmother to ask Perkos for help. Camilla deduced that her grandson also heard the stories of the saints, and perhaps he is interested in the throne. The Bao Emperor had 2 children, the crown prince, bedridden with an incurable disease, and a princess without a coming-of-age ceremony. Perhaps Theo wants to take advantage of that opportunity and take the throne, gaining the saint's power. However, the Northern Grand Duke was not interested in the throne, nor in the saint's power. He wanted to ensure that no one could use that power, not even the saint herself. Camilla was astonished to hear her grandson's words. She didn't understand at all why he wanted to do that. As long as a drop of imperial blood runs through Tio's veins, Perkos will not believe him. Camilla's words will not be enough. The woman begged Tio to promise to help Perkos. She asked him to tell him that the Archduke would stop the imperial family, which wants to steal the saint's power. Camilla didn't know what her grandson was plotting, but if he had come to her, he was probably desperate. Theo asked the lady to say what she wanted. After all, they were making a deal. The woman heard that her grandson had gotten married, and it seemed to be to a girl from a village on the island. But why not meet Princess Ashlyn instead, who has arrived at the festival? Camilla heard that Ashlyn's kingdom invested in the processing of magic stones, and it has already amassed a fortune. However, Theo firmly rejected such a proposal. Previously, the hero was engaged to the princess, but the king of Ashlyn said he would never give up his daughter, and even fainted. Camilla decided to ask her grandson if he was getting along well with his current wife now. She asked that because apparently Theo does not love her. He didn't even bother to have a wedding. The protagonist remembered that, in reality, he made that decision himself. For Yuna's first wedding, he was too indifferent. Astonishment flooded Camilla's face when her only grandson announced that they would indeed have the ceremony. Theo awkwardly explained that they had only postponed it. Upon returning, the wedding would be held. Then Camilla revealed her wish. She wants her grandson to send her a wedding invitation. The Archduke exclaimed that he would rather give magic stones, but the lady already had plenty. Theo offered investments in his businesses, but the woman replied that she already had more than enough money. If the Grand Duke could not fulfill this wish, then they could not reach an agreement. The Archduke could not refute that cunning old fox and finally agreed to send her the invitation. Suddenly, Camilla asked if all this was the reason for his visit. The man looked out the window at the garden and asked his grandmother if these gardens were cultivated with magic stones. Camilla did not use magic stones, but these flowers have no fragrance. For the Grand Duke, it was perfect, so he told the lady that he would take a couple of flowers. And then, without a doubt, he would give them to his wife. He promised to bring her some. Theo headed for the exit, not noticing the grandmother's look of astonishment after his words. The protagonist thanked all the ladies for coming to see her. Yuna tried very hard to decorate this place for her dear guests, so she hoped they liked it. Emily smiled and began to inspect everything around her. The Grand Duchess seated everyone around a round table. Its main advantage is that everyone is equal there, but Emily pointed out that the trees were not perfectly trimmed and the uniqueness needed polishing. Nevertheless, the idea of using a round table for tea delighted the aristocrat. It seemed that they could chat comfortably. Other ladies agreed with the words of the hostess Brown. Teresa, somewhat embarrassed, asked Yuna where Ray was. Marie, with a cunning smile, revealed that lately Teresa couldn't stop talking about Lady Ray. Determined to change the subject, Emily suggested giving the group a name, since they would see each other more often. The protagonist thought it was a fantastic idea. Marie suggested choosing a simple name, something like tea cake, because every time they meet, the young nobles enjoy tea and cake. The rest thought the idea was great. Suddenly, Ray approached the protagonist to announce that Lady Giselle had come to visit her. Madame Brown tensed, not understanding why Giselle had shown up there. After clearing up the misunderstanding, she explained that Yuna was a very good person, nothing like what they were saying. It turns out that Emily had told her dear friend that today she was going to have tea with Grand Duchess Yuna. Apparently, Giselle had also become curious. The protagonist was very excited and asked to invite the guest in. Upon seeing her dear friend, Emily jumped towards her and asked with a smile what she was doing there. If she hadn't told her a word, Giselle replied haughtily that she was simply curious to know what kind of person the Grand Duchess was. In reality, this is even better. If Giselle sees Yuna with her own eyes, she will understand that the previous time was just a misunderstanding. The Archduchess greeted the esteemed guest, but the lady did not respond. She simply sat down at the table haughtily. Yuna greeted Giselle once more, and she nodded, finally deigning to introduce herself. The woman thanked her for the reception. Despite her unexpected visit, the protagonist, with a kind smile, replied that she was always happy to see Emily's friends. Madame asked mockingly what had happened to the garden. It looked like a horde of children had destroyed everything. Confusion and indignation appeared on Yuna's face at the same time. Meanwhile, Giselle continued, "All this seems like complete nonsense. Trees of different sizes and colorful flowers everywhere. How can you use a round table for tea? How will people know where to sit?" The mistress of the Brown house couldn't take it anymore and told her friend that she was going too far. Giselle is currently only criticizing nonsense. Marie exclaimed that she also wanted to buy such a table. The garden was also magnificent. The ladies asked her ladyship not to worry. When all the flowers bloom, it will be much more radiant. Jaisel didn't understand how someone dared to contradict her, and concluded that the Archduchess had bribed everyone. Perhaps that armada of dishes that the haughty Yuna gave them influenced her. Madame heard that the Grand Duke had gone to the Servan festival, and the protagonist confirmed it. Everyone knows the Grand Duke doesn't attend festivals, so perhaps he went there for Princess Ashlyn. Ashlyn's kingdom may be small and weak, but its princesses are known for their impressive beauty. Furthermore, the Northern Grand Duke once proposed marriage to Princess Ashlyn. They say he even organized a riot demanding her hand. Emily indignantly asked why her friend was talking about that now. Jaisel, with a cunning smile, there is nothing wrong with that, since her ladyship is married to the Grand Duchess. Although it is strange that he went to the festival and left his wife. Mrs. Brown jumped up furiously and, pointing at the door, shouted at Jaisel to leave immediately. The other ladies vehemently supported her. Jaisel, with false innocence, asked what was wrong, as she hadn't said anything bad. Ray approached to escort her to the exit. If the lady said one more word, the young woman promised she would face serious consequences later. Jaisel felt a shiver run down her spine. She exclaimed that she would find her own way out, that she was leaving. After all, she was a very busy woman. The lady left, but Yuna was left with a bad taste in her mouth after her visit. Marie gently touched the Grand Duchess's hand and asked her not to take that woman's words to heart. The ladies recounted that their husbands were also not very kind at first, but then everything changed. Yuna thanked everyone for the warm words and assured them that everything was fine. Everyone has their first love. Emily cheerfully exclaimed that the important thing is the present. The protagonist, somewhat embarrassed, asked, "Is Princess Ashlyn really that beautiful?" The ladies immediately shouted that the Grand Duchess is much more beautiful. Her beauty takes your breath away. After sunset, during the festival, Tio took a sip of an expensive red wine. The Grand Duke visited the festival for the first time. It is almost impossible to meet that man. In that case, the aristocrats saw it as the perfect opportunity to secure investment for their new business. Ulysses approached the lord and reported the arrival of the High Priest Perkos. At that moment, a man approached the Northern Grand Duke. He was an aristocrat with a business idea, but Tio dismissed them all without hesitation. Tio's face hardened even more, and Ulysses, seeing it, explained with a polite smile that the Archduke had an urgent matter. If it concerns investments, you can discuss them with him. While Ulysses is in the south, we must find a business that increases the Duke's fortune. Therefore, he asked all interested parties to line up. The festival was just beginning, but the Grand Duke had already arrived early. Theo informed Percus that he had not come all the way here to enjoy the festival. The High Priest would never think that his lordship would attend a meeting with Lady Camilla. But if the Lord wants to hear his story, the man must promise Percus something more concrete. Theo felt like he had expressed his intentions with complete clarity. But the High Priest wanted to hear something more than just words. It had to be a life oath. In other words, Percos was now talking about an oath to the gods. The High Priest placed a hemp rope on the table. With his actions, Percos showed his meticulousness, so the Grand Duke suggested not delaying and starting soon. To make the oath, you must wrap Daphne's ties around your wrist, filled with divine power, one of the components of the oath, which binds the oath and the soul. This is how they merge. For violating an oath to a god, one pays with their own life. Now Tio must swear to protect the saint, which also means that he, as Northern Grand Duke, will not harm her. The man swore decisively that, come what may, he would protect the saint. The ties instantly lit up with a golden glow, imprisoning Theo's wrists. It turns out that blood is necessary for the oath, so the Northern Grand Duke will suffer a bit. Theo felt the blood flowing slowly, but it was quite bearable. However, the man's chest immediately began to burn. Even his voice broke into a cry of pain. But finally, it was all over. Theo should feel as if his heart and Yuna's are connected. That is the proof that the oath has been completed. The Northern Archduke did well. Tio concluded that the High Priest easily endures that pain. Percos replied, only the one making the oath feels pain. He simply poured a little of his divine power. What the High Priest did not understand was why his lord was looking at him with such fury. Tio proposed forgetting it, and finally moving on to the important conversation. Percos nodded, accepting the Grand Duke's proposal. As the forbidden texts say, the saints convey the message of the goddess Daphne, and the saint herself can create holy water. But if the problem were only the holy water, everything would be simpler. The holy water did not disappear on its own. Perko's already checked that. Most likely, someone is stealing it. The same thing is happening in the temples of Phoenix and Servant. Someone is stealing holy water for some incomprehensible reason. After Tio took the oath, the high priest has no reason to lie. First, Perkos wanted to find those who steal the holy water. He must know their motives to protect the saint. As expected, the Bayon Empire is the main suspect. Perkos knew that the Bayo Empire eagerly desired the saint's power and would do anything to obtain it. But needing that much holy water implies that not only the Bayo Empire is involved in this. Your Excellency surely knows who the saint is and how to steal her power. The Lord traveled so far south to recognize the saint, so the Archduke is convinced of her existence. That means Your Excellency already knows that the Empire craves the saint's power. Only now did Tia understand that the high priest had been testing him this whole time, and he didn't even realize it. In that case, Perkos surely knew who the saint was, but the priest did not want to act rashly, because every one of his steps is being watched. So Perkos acted differently. He gladly contacted those seeking the saint's power. In other words, the priest decided to be the bait, because appealing directly to the saint would only cause tension. The prophecies always spoke of protecting the saint, because that spoke of snatching her power. In any case, whoever breaks their oath to God will die, and the Northern Grand Duke must not forget it. It's Perkos' time. As final advice, he warned that Tio might hear the goddess's voice through the holy power within him. Therefore, the high priest begged that she grant her blessing to the world. But the only important thing for Theo was for Yuna to always be by his side and smile. The carriage was heading to its destination. Looking out the window, the Northern Archduke supposed they would soon enter the forest. He used a protective spell, so the flowers will be fine. Soon the man will switch the carriage for a horse, so he should get some sleep. Little Theo called out to his mother with a pitiful moan. He begged the woman to wake up, because she herself promised her son that she would return soon. Theo protected the duchy while she was away, so the child begged his mother to get up, and they would go together. This dream always starts the same way. The protagonist fell again and again, until his strength was completely exhausted. Not even in dreams could Theo protect his mother. Both then and now, the Northern Grand Duke remains an insignificant, powerless human. He closed his eyes, and treacherous tears immediately sprang forth. Suddenly, the protagonist heard a voice ordering him to wake up, as this place was not for him. The girl didn't know what to do, as the man's body was already very cold. Theo's body refused to move, so he couldn't even see who it was. Meanwhile, the unknown woman approached and promised the protagonist that his suffering would end. Theo instantly felt warmth. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed by an irresistible desire to sleep. The protagonist opened his eyes suddenly, waking from a deep sleep and breathed with difficulty. He had dreamed that nightmare again. The man immediately wondered whose voice that was, as he had never heard it before. Looking at the flowers, Theo froze.